It's okay, Maxie. Be quiet.
Okay, hey everybody, I'm here with Lucas Gage, the notorious Lucas Gage, who has gotten a lot of attention recently with his Twitter account and the unfortunate suspension thereof. I think it was really all just a misunderstanding. If you want to talk a little bit about that first, and then we can get into the philosophy stuff.
Yeah, I'm known for my very, I guess you could call them unhinged rants, although they're very calculated and they're not unhinged. They're very passionate rants that people love, where I just go all in and start yelling at the camera like a drill instructor. And this comes from my military background. And I feel that we have a lot of information out there. We have all the truth out there. We got to get people moving and inspired. So my style or my shtick is really to get out there and start, kind of being like a drill instructor. Oh, you guys got back. And, I've done them a few times and they went very viral. In fact, all of my rants have gotten me on the map in several points of my life and different phases of my life. But the most recent one, I said a few things which, if you edit it correctly or deceptively, you could make it seem like I'm asking for the murder of certain people, which I wasn't. But these people, who we will not name on this stream, have many organizations, and that organization called Canary Mission took this specific rant, chopped it down to 3 minutes, and made it seem like I want to slay demons, implying that it's these actual people rather than metaphorically, which the next sentence, if you kept playing it, it would explain what I meant by that. I meant all you got to do is shame them, call them out, and expose them for what they are. And that's all I say you need to do. But if you remove that context, which they did, it says like, it makes it seem like slay these demons. And that's it. And then they move on to the next cut and it makes it look like I'm inciting violence. And so this was circulating for a few days, this edited post. Then I put fire extinguishers in a quote tweet, 3 of them, which apparently is a violation. And then I got this Michael Myers video that I made where he's stomping an Israeli flag head on the ground, and it's from a movie. And so I got suspended for a week. Actually, I got locked out for a week for making fun of these 2 men at the Capitol building engaging in acts that we should not discuss here because it's YouTube. And I made a play on words that these people should get capital punishment for capital crimes, right? And I spelled them differently because it's a play on words. That got me the 7-day lockout. And while I'm sitting there on the 7-day lockout, I'm getting hit with emails. This is visibility issue. This, you're suspended. You lost ad revenue. I'm like, whoa, what's going on here? And it comes down to these 3 posts. The rant, which was already hit with visibility, so I thought that was okay. Apparently they hit it again. And then the emojis, and then the Michael Myers video. And so I had a lot of friends say, free Lucas Gage, a lot of people out there posting it. And Elon Musk responded to this man named Suleiman Ahmed, who's an ally of mine. We've been pushing this stuff against Zionism. And he goes, Gage being suspended for a fire extinguisher would be idiotic. He got suspended for his rant where he said he wants to slay these people, put them in quotes, and that's not protected speech. And that's what Elon said. And everyone's been blasting him with the unedited version, like another 3-minute clip where it goes after what I said, explaining it. I even got Stop Zionist Hate to send Canary Mission a cease and desist. They responded with more edited videos because they have the chutzpah like you've never seen before. And that's where I'm at right now. So I got a 3-month suspension, which is unheard of. No one in X or Twitter history has ever gotten this suspension before. So I'm not complaining because it's not permanent, right? Because I built up from when I got back in February, I got my account back. I had like 24,000 people. And just a few weeks ago, I hit 224,000. So I was almost at 225,000. So I gained a lot of people very quickly in the last 2 months, like 100,000 after October 7th. And so this kind of suspension, which is 3 months long, is unheard of. And people are already like, man, we want you back. We miss you, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, this is not even that bad of a thing, right? I get a break, right? And I really pushed freedom of speech as far as I could. I really did. I was pressing people's buttons, and they decided, this guy's going too far. Here's how we're going to get him. And I think they went back, got those other tweets. But I think Elon responded to this edited clip, which I think he saw. We all know he saw it because he said he saw it. Mm-hmm. And so he was deceived. And I'm trying to show him in my appeals. I've done 5 appeals now, linking his own tweet, like, look, you saw this. And they just keep saying no. And frankly, I think it's better off Elon just kicks me to the side for 3 months than to reinstall me now, because then he'll get even more, attacks because of that. So yeah, I got to take it on the chin. I did push it, and that's okay. I inspired a lot of people. I woke up a lot of millions of people around the world. I got DMs, emails from all over the place. It's crazy. So I did my part, but right now I'm suspended until March something. I think March 20th. I just hope it's not a fake suspension, like, oh, he's suspended, and then they go, never mind, we changed our mind, he's permanently suspended, or something like this. Or I come back day one and there's other posts they have lined up and they hit me with those immediately and I get nuked again. I hope it's not a trick of some sort. So what I'm going to do when I get back is I'm going to nuke everything. Like, I'm going to get tweet delete and just delete every post ever made, just to clean the slate, because you know how these people are, man. They're always looking for stuff.
Your videos are still on Rumble, because you have a lot of good videos up. I think we're getting some echo off your speakers.
Oh yeah, because I don't have headphones on. Let me do that for you.
Wait a minute.
Let's see.
Yeah. Somebody has to push it, though. And people don't realize, when you're speaking off the cuff, it's easy to let something slip out that could be misinterpreted, no matter how careful you are.
Yeah, I'm not on a script. I don't. Another thing about my rants, they're from the heart. They're from the soul. And that's what people, and I can sit there for 45 minutes and just talk off the cuff. And I'd mess up scripts. If I had to read a script, I'd screw up so much. So I don't do scripts, but, yeah, I mean, that thing was a rant and I pushed hard and I explained myself. And by the way, Arvel, I've had police come to my house because of the things I've said on X. I mean, this is not China, but it's turning into China. I had the police come to my house. The thing was January 4th. I forgot what month it was. Like a couple of weeks ago, at least. Was it? Anyway, it's on my X somewhere. And they came because of the posts I made. And I'm like, officer, I'm here using my free speech. Like, yeah, but these people in this community are concerned. And then they called the state police. And I recorded this. I don't know if you saw it, if you saw the swatting of my house from these people. They came by, asked questions, and the state police said, do you have any guns? I'm like, actually, I don't. I don't have any weapons at all. And, well, they said that you're armed and dangerous. You're going to kill people. I said, that's ridiculous. And they all know it's stupid, but they have to do their job and investigate so-called, dangerous people. And I've actually run into this guy years ago, because this happened years ago too. This community doesn't really like me. Let's put it that way. I've been a thorn in their side for years. But, yeah, so that's the thing. I did the free speech thing as far as I could. I wanted to see. And I look back now, Arvel, and I'm seeing already that these people have, got the vice grip on X. I'm looking at posts that I had up that are now getting visibility issues when I'm not even on. So I'm looking through my other timeline, posts that were totally fine. My friend Sam Parker just got hit. One of his posts from 3.5 years ago got mass reported. Now it's a pinned post, but still. That survived Jack Dorsey's Twitter. Why now is it an issue under Elon Musk? You see, so another woman, she joined my locals community this 4 hours ago. She said, "Hey, I got suspended for
mass reported. No,
I got suspended for putting an emoji next to a menorah." So she got suspended for the same thing. Anyway, so it's who knows what's going on. I don't think Elon micromanages his company. Obviously, it's like 5 different companies, right? This guy. So there's probably some old Twitter people there, and there's probably the ADL moving around. We know the ADL's back there doing something, and there's certain people they want to silence, and I'm one of them. And that's just part of the job description. You want to go against these people, you're going to have to pay a heavy price. And I'm just thankful it's not permanent, but I hope it's not a ruse to make people forget about me. Oh, he'll be back in 3 months, and then they just move on. But my friends and allies have made it sure that they're not going to let that happen. So right now, I'm just sitting on Telegram. I made a Telegram, a Rumble channel's growing. Gab, I'm just trying to get people around to other places where I'm at for now, and then, enjoy this little vacation from X. And it's going to cost me money too. I mean, 3 months without ad revenue, which they put on pause, that cost me money, unfortunately. And so, but hey, this isn't about money, but I'm just making a point that even Elon's willing to lose money to silence me. Because if I'm making $1,000 a month, right? What is he making? 10,000? I don't know what the conversion is. You know what I mean? So yeah, this is the price we all pay for free speech.
Right. Yeah. And props to you for actually putting your neck out there. But we do have to troubleshoot, because I think the audio issue is not fixed somehow. It might be a hardware issue. So I'm going to unplug my mic and plug it back in.
It's not on the Twitter. I mean, On YouTube, I don't hear it.
Okay, they were saying it was still
Oh no,
happening.
it's your end.
Yeah, let me.
No, it
Okay,
is your
let's see
end.
if that fixed it.
It's not my end. It's your end.
Just give me 1 second here.
Oh, are you using OBS?
Oh no, that's not good. All right. Lucas, can you hear me?
I could hear you. Yeah,
No.
I could hear
That's not
you.
good.
Yeah, the echo's from you, Orville. Are you using
Yeah,
OBS?
it's
What are you using?
Gonna be a problem. Okay, that didn't help. Give me 1 second. I'm using the identical setup that I use every single time. Same setup.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing has changed. That's great.
Can you hear me though? Right?
Oh boy. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Well, it could be your headphones picking up with the mic and your headphone mic, and then the computer mic too.
Okay. So I don't have a solution here.
Are you using OBS though? Can you hear me?
Okay, let's try this. I'm gonna leave the call and come back in. I don't know what's coming through on YouTube. Okay. Can you hear me now?
I could hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear
I
you.
cannot hear you.
You can't hear me now.
That's
huh?
terrible.
Well, then go to
All right,
your.
we're gonna reset. We're just gonna have to stop it and start again. And
So does that mean our link is dead or no?
I think it was a short enough period of time. It'll
Okay.
still be the same
Okay.
stream, I believe. Okay. Let us know if it's fixed.
It's yours. It's your mic, dude. I can still hear it.
You can still hear it?
On the YouTube, I can hear your reverb.
Again. Yeah, this is so bizarre because it's the same setup. It must just be my mic has failed me. People are saying it's all good though, so okay.
It says a lot better.
A lot better, but you still hear it?
I'm listening to the YouTube video as you're listening to you, and I hear
Okay. Well, if it's tolerable for people, we may just have to settle for this for now. Yeah, I can't remove the headphones because it'll just be worse.
Well, what if you mute your desktop audio?
Yeah, there's no sound coming out of the desktop, just my headphones here.
Okay, so then what's your OBS look like? Is it like how many other green things are popping up? It seems like you have double audio, right?
You would think so, but I'm using a Yeti mic. Got my Yeti, and then
yeah, but your headphones have a microphone in it. You see that? So your headphones are plugged in as a headphone, but it also has a microphone in it, and it's probably picking up both.
You think so?
That's what I think.
I don't know if they work that way. I'll switch my headphones.
Just pull out your headphones completely.
The stream is just like tech support now.
Yeah, tech stream. Yeah, pull your head. I think that's what's happening.
All right, is that any better?
Let me see. Say something.
All right, testing, testing. No?
No. What is going on?
Can you hear me now?
I could hear you, but there's still this reverb.
Oh man. Yeah, so this is going super well. Let me go ahead and just switch to my desktop mic, which is going to be a little bit worse. But I'll switch that here, and I'll switch it over here. We're going to see. All right, is the audio issue fixed?
Let's see. No, I don't know what it is, dude.
Yeah, it's the CIA. I agree with Philip Augusta. It's the same setup I always use. It could be an issue with the stream itself somehow, but you'd think it wouldn't just be on my end. Well, all right. They're saying it's not a big deal.
Yeah, you just sound like you're demonic a little bit. That's all.
Excellent. All right. Well, you wrote a book, right? So why don't you tell us about the book that you wrote and what inspired you to do it, how long it took, what the process was, and so forth.
All right. So yeah, I wrote a book. Let me just get the. I don't see you anymore, but I'm watching the thing. I wrote a book called Thoughts and Reflections on Life by me, Lucas Gage, and this book was inspired by Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. So I'm a big fan of Stoicism, and when I read Marcus Aurelius's book, which is basically a diary to himself, I enjoyed the format. So I did the same thing he did. I basically wrote my book in 21 sections, and each section has different entries. And the entries, like for example, this is section 6, right? And you see the different entries. There's 15 entries in each section, and they're completely irrelevant to the one. So if you read, so section 6.1 has one thing to do with something, and then this number 2 is another thing. It's just like, it's a book that I wanted to make where it's easy to read. And it's kind of like you're sitting on the toilet and you just pick it up and you read a few things and you get different aphorisms in life. You get metaphysics, philosophy, or politics. You get self-help, like health and fitness, relationships. So it's more than what Marcus Aurelius discussed about being a better person. It's virtually anything I think about in life. So it's been very good. Actually, people enjoy it very much. I talk about a lot of things, and I use some NLP techniques that I've used on people when I was life coaching. So this is something I wanted to do. It took about a year, and I actually finished it a year later on the same day that I started it. So it was like February 20th, I started it. And then a year later, I finished it on February 20th or something like this. And I wrote it like every day I'd write something, and some days I wouldn't. I didn't really have a timing. I didn't put any pressure on it. So it took a year to write, and it actually took 6 months to edit. That's the worst part, is editing, because you go back and you see, oh, I shouldn't have used the comma there. And then you add one and you do this and you change the word. And if you change the word, you change the whole paragraph. It's just annoying. So the easiest part is writing the book. And the way it's formatted was very easy because I didn't have to worry about chapter 1, 80 pages of one subject, right? I didn't have to do any research. It all came from my soul, if you will. And it covers all my thoughts about in life. And I discuss various topics, like I said. And, but it's really about taming the ego. So there's a lot of entries where I talk about taming the ego, what you truly are, what is your true form, the true self and the false self, that kind of stuff that really helped me because, I have the PTSD and I felt myself deal with it and other people deal with it as well. When I took neurolinguistic programming a few years ago, I did it to learn about how to deal with these thoughts in my head. And the book basically tells you that you're not your thoughts and you're not your emotions. These are things that happen to you. Like none of us choose a thought to think of before it comes, or none of us causes emotions to ourselves. These are things that happen to us. And if we identify with the false self, the ego, the story, the name, the thoughts, the feelings, this is where you cause unnecessary suffering, right? You try to look at the world and want it to be a certain way rather than how it actually is. So we want to take control of things that we can't control. And Stoicism talks about that. You can't control what people think of you. You can't control what's going on outside of you. But you can control how you react to those things. So Stoicism was a big philosophy that helped me. Also, I'm a big fan of Alan Watts. Got into that for a little bit, the Zen Buddhist kind of thing. And then the final, what you call it, brick of philosophy that really hit me was the Taoism, the Tao Te Ching from Lao Tzu. I actually just listened to it on an audio on YouTube, and it made me tear up. It really did, because it was like the final icing of the cake. And Stoicism and Taoism are somewhat different, but quite similar in a way. They both are about submitting, like kind of going with the flow in a way. But the Stoics believed you could control your mind more and focus on things, which I agree to an extent. Whereas Taoism is like everything just goes with the flow, and that's just let things happen, trust the universe, and things like this. So I enjoyed both philosophies. Then there's Alan Watts, who's just hilarious to me. He's a comical guy, very well-spoken Englishman, and he was an Anglican priest. He left the religion and so on. And so I wrote this book, and it's kind of all these ideas, and I have political solutions in there. So those of you who are political minded, I'm not a politician. I'm not even like, I call myself a philosopher, but I'm not really, like, for example, I would call you more of a philosopher than me, because you know more philosophy, you know more philosophers, you've read more books, you know more terminology. I'm kind of like this, like one guy, I actually wrote it in a book. Some guy one time insulted me. He goes, "You're just a barstool philosopher preaching to the inebriated." I'm like, you know what? It's the first time everyone ever called me a philosopher, because I just love, I love to think, I love wisdom, I want to learn. So like, that's really the prerequisite of philosophy. You don't have to be a scholar from Yale to be a philosopher. And I know everything Heidegger wrote and Kantian logic. You don't have to know all that. You just have to be someone who seeks knowledge. And the more you seek it, the more you realize, I don't know much. And that's really humbling. And when you read the Tao Te Ching, it's like, what is this thing? I don't know what it is. What's its name? It doesn't have a name. If you try to name it, it's not there. And you start humbling yourself through this universe or this God force or whatever the case. And you realize, you know what? It's not about acquiring more knowledge, which can become addicting. And it's, I think, ego driven, because you want to know. You want to know more, because then you think you're safe, but you're never safe. So instead of filling your head with all these isms and all these arguments, you kind of let go and think, how do I live? Marcus Aurelius said, instead of thinking about how to be a good man, thinking about what a good man is, become one, right? It's like thought into action. And that's where I'm at now in my life. I used to think like yourself. I used to like most philosophers want to discover every single truth and see many arguments. For example, I used to watch like John Lennox versus, what's his name? Dawkins. Is it Dawkins? What is his name? I'm talking about.
He's a biologist, Richard Dawkins.
Yeah, Richard Dawkins. So I watched debates about, does God exist? I'd watch Sam Harris versus Daniel Lane Craig or whatever. All these, and I said to myself, at the end of these debates, nobody knows who's right. They're fun, and maybe someone makes a logical fallacy, they get caught. But even that doesn't mean he's wrong. So it's like we waste 3 hours of our lives. It's kind of like a boxing match. So I walk away from these God debates, and I don't know if he exists or not. And even if I change my mind, how do I know I picked the right side? Now, one side is right, but none of us know. So it's fun, but that's really it. What can we do with this? You know what I mean? So I kind of looked at it like a sparring match. Okay, this is cool. And I'll watch debates, and I like to listen to people's perspectives. But I realized that, perhaps it's just mental masturbation. And I'm not trying to put down philosophy, because, it's been going on for thousands of years. There's been arguments for thousands of years that haven't even been solved. And people try to say philosophy is dead, which in of itself is a philosophical statement. They say science is the answer. Well, science is limited. Science, I say in my book, is like a measuring stick. It can only measure the objective world. It can't do anything more than that. It cannot answer whether or not God exists. It can't even tell you why I feel this way, or how I'm doing right now, or why did I drink that tea. They can say, well, he's thirsty, and they give you an equation about the chemistry in my stomach, but why did I choose that one and not the other one? Or what's going on? They don't know what love is. So science is beautiful. It gives us technology, but it doesn't know what anything is, right? We could use energy, but we don't know what the hell it is. We know how gravity acts, but we don't know what the hell gravity is. So the essence of something, science has no clue. But how about philosophy? What is the essence of the things we look at? Oh, we don't know either. So there's some things we're just not going to know. And I've pretty much said to myself, I just don't know. Now, that doesn't mean I don't know anything. Of course, we could find out there are certain things we can know in certain circumstances. But I've kind of humbled myself, and kind of with the Taoist worldview, just go with the flow. Instead of thinking so much. I know the examined life is not, the unexamined life is not worth living, but how much examination are you going to do till you're not even living at all? You're just analyzing everything, and you live in paralysis your whole life. And I feel like that's the problem with those of us who think too much. And listen to me, I used to think so much. Now I think so much less and my life has improved. And I feel it's because the ego wants to learn things because it wants to control things. But once you realize that you can't control anything, and I argue free will is not even ours either, that you just have to submit to what's going on and let it happen. Now, that doesn't mean that you're submitting to bad things like, oh, well, rape happens, so what? I'm not going to stop it. All of us have a nature. So in my book, I talk about we all have a nature that we have to live. And some of us are resisting that nature or don't even know what that nature is. And therefore, we have all this suffering. So, really, my book's about taming the ego and getting rid of unnecessary suffering, which comes from trying to control things you can't control, identifying with the ego, right? Trying to wish the world was different, and things, so on and so forth. So that's really what it's about. Because all of us suffer. So that's one thing we have in common. And again, it's also, I sprinkle some politics, I sprinkle some other things and opinions and fitness tricks and, nutrition and stuff like this. So I do more than Marcus does, but it was really inspired by Marcus Aurelius and his style of writing. And that's why it was so much easier to write than some, chapter 1, 80 pages, chapter 2, 100, that I just don't like reading those kind of books anyway. But yeah, you can find my book at lucasgage.com. There's a PDF format for those of you who like to read PDF. And in other countries, for example, I've sold a lot of books to other countries. Shipping's like $28. It sucks. Or you get the paperback for $14.99. But the book was something I did just to do it because my grandfather, he is a philosopher. My grandfather Angelo, on my father's side, he was a philosopher at Syracuse University, very strict Catholic, super Roman. He used to do prayers in Latin. So instead of going grace, thank the Lord, he would lit Abadas Dominus, like literally at the table. He'd write in Latin. He'd write to the Vatican to correct them on things. Super religious guy. And he was writing a book and he never finished it. So it's kind of like a running joke in the family. Like, well, he passed away, but that's not why he didn't finish it, though. He just never got to finishing it. So I'm like, I'm going to finish it. And I kind of did it in a year. So it's kind of a goal. Plus, it was something I wanted to do. And I did it. And people enjoy it. They think it's a wonderful book. They say it's something they never read before. And it's a very easy read. And that's why I made it the way I did, because I don't like reading long, drawn out chapters because I forget things very quickly. I don't even know what's in my book sometimes. I forget what I wrote. So, but yeah, that's my book. It's pretty cool. I mean, it's very unique. I could tell you that. It's like Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, the format. Very similar.
Yeah, it sounds great. I would like to check it out. Plato sometimes warns against misologia, which is that feeling like ultimately argumentation is fruitless and you're tending a little bit in that direction in some ways, but also you recognize that obviously we need argumentation to build up to the sciences. Without philosophy, we wouldn't know what the limitations of a given science are. Like, you couldn't know the nature of physics using the tools of physics, that sort of thing. Like, philosophy is the most general space of reasoning when we have problems that aren't even properly formulated yet. Once a problem is identified, then you can go about solving it in more cut and dry mathematical methods and it becomes a science. But we don't necessarily know what all the problems are in a given space up front. But it sounds like you were really entering in more from a psychological perspective. And Stoicism does have a lot of great insights in that regard. Cognitive behavior therapy is a
Yeah.
modern
Mm-hmm.
system, kind of self help. My wife uses it a lot. I've read a bit of it and I do find it useful. But basically, the essence there is shared in common with the Stoic conception of like the virtuous life being the life governed by reason. That's also in common with Platonism as well. Of course, we have the different elements of the soul, like spirited emotion. Obviously, you're a highly like thumatic, spirited character. Um, and then some people are led more by appetite, and some people are led more by reason. So, if possible, we should deliberate with reason when we're engaged in thinking, but there are many things that you don't need to think about. So, I think that's a serious bit of wisdom there. If we don't have to deliberate and contemplate a given issue, if it's just obvious what we need to do, sometimes you need to let, your spirit take over and do what is necessary. And in the political domain that you operate in very often, the answers are not that complex. It just takes courage to state them. Um, but yeah, that issue of like combating the ego is an interesting one. I do find that having the ability to rationally analyze thoughts as they come up allows you a greater degree of freedom. So I guess we could segue into the issue of free will. You say you don't necessarily believe that we have free will. I heard an argument that I've heard from Sam Harris in what you said just then, which is basically like thoughts just appear to us. We don't really decide exactly what thoughts come to mind. Even as I'm talking right now, I'm not really fundamentally free will summoning every single word. It just appears to me. And I think it's like 90-95% true. But, it does seem that different people have different degrees of freedom. So since we can identify that some people are totally slavishly obeying their appetites and some people are able to exercise that agency and generate novel behaviors and creative plans, makes me think there's something to human freedom. So what do you think about that idea of human freedom? How is it related to the
Well,
ego?
I want
All
to
that
say one thing
stuff.
about philosophy. I said in my book, philosophy is like the spell checker for the mind. It's like it makes you figure out where you belong in the world rather than discovering about the world. It's what part are you playing? What do you agree with about these many different theories of the world? And you go, oh, that's what, and you kind of check yourself. So when you're with your interlocutor and he refutes you, that's not a loss. You actually learn, oh, wait, you know what? That's right. I was wrong. You can't lose in philosophy. But there are a lot of people who have I don't want to be wrong. And they come up with all these copes and strategies to defeat the other person. I can't wait to be wrong because that means I got rid of the lies, But then the question is, well, what is truth? Do we even have the truth? And that's a whole other story. But in regards to free will, I wrote in my book that um, like I take medication, right? I take paroxetine and Klonopin, very small dosages. And when I don't take these things, everything changes. But not just that, even hunger changes your personality and situations to change your personality. So it's not that there's one thing making a decision, it's all of you making the decision, right? The conscious observer, which is the true self, the entity that lies behind the eyes, the one that hears the thoughts, the one that feels the emotions, the experiencer seems to be making a choice, but also that brain, and so is your stomach, and there's colonies of organisms and the environment and the situation. So I don't think there's any like a free will would be there is something that makes decisions based on nothing but its will at that second without any causals before it, right? Well, we have history behind us. Every decision we make today is based on, well, let's suppose I want to choose what to eat for dinner today. Well, I could either eat the same thing I ate yesterday because it was so damn good, or I say, I don't want to eat that because I ate it yesterday. And it could be like, how hungry am I? And what time is it? There's a trillion different things that affect my free will. So I don't think free will is possible just because there are so many other factors. And then this entire organism that we are, again, there's a true self, false self, there's your body, there's your hormones, there's people, the environment. It's like everything is making a choice. It's not just you. Now, it depends if you identify with your thoughts, which is really the learning process, you think you're making a choice. So I'm saying we actually have a learning. When we make a decision, we are observing the learning process or the decision making process of what the body, the mind, the soul, whatever the environment is deciding to do with the best information it has. This is why you cannot make a mistake on purpose. You can't choose to make a mistake on purpose. It only is a mistake when you go back and go, oh, I didn't mean to do that. But you make a decision based on what you believe at the time is true. And none of your beliefs are a choice, not one of them. I can't say, Arval, guess what? What do you believe? God? I want you to stop believing right now. You can't freely choose not to believe in God. So your beliefs are not a choice. Your attraction to things are not a choice. You see a beautiful woman, you're attracted to her. You have no choice. If you smell food you like, oh, what's that? You don't choose that. So just like beliefs are not a choice, neither is attraction, neither is the olfactory senses or the preference for certain food. These things just happen. They're just chemistry. So in a way, when it comes to making a choice, we are seeing the process of choosing happening, and we are identifying with that part of the conscious mind that's doing it. But I'm not going to say it's an illusion because it's truly happening. But that's not just you doing it. It's not the avatar doing it. It's your subconscious. It's your history. Because look, you might not do something that you could do because of your past. Well, last time I did that, I got hurt. So where's the choice now? Now you can say, well, maybe I won't get hurt this time. That still depends on last time. And what about the future? Well, if I get hurt, that really hurts, so I don't want to do it. So the pain of the future that could come, if there's really, where's the freedom of this choice? You see, that's my argument. So I know there's people who are compatibilists or hard determinists. I guess I'd be a hard determinist, but I don't know. I could be absolutely wrong. There could be some kind of way where that does work, but I'm not so sure. What do you think? What I just
Yeah,
said.
I do think that choice, ironically, is deterministic because the dynamic is all things seek the good, kind of by definition. The good is that which things desire. The object of desire is the good. And so, whatever we perceive to be the best, we are going to choose, always. Sometimes we'll know at some level, there are multiple levels of awareness that we have. The visceral, immediate awareness that that slice of pizza looks delicious might sometimes overpower the more like rational, deliberating part of ourselves that says, well, but we're going to gain weight. We're not going to be as healthy and happy long term. But in the moment, whatever impresses itself as best, we are going to choose. And yeah, it's important to be aware of all of the various systems that are coming into play in making that choice. If we, though, augment the state of our knowledge, then we do alter the dynamics in which choice occurs. If you're ignorant of the nature of your appetite, then the way that you make choices is going to be ill informed, and you're probably going to hurt yourself long run for short term pleasure. So, knowledge is where we have some kind of freedom. You might oppose choice as this deterministic process of like we go to what we perceive to be best against volition, which is the process of creating what we are through our proper nature essence, which is our more like intellective side. Like we're a form, we're not matter. We're not the body, we're the soul that informs the body. And to fully manifest that proper nature that is unique to what we are, to exercise like our true causal powers, is to kind of tweak those ratios. How much are we aware of? How much is conscious? How much is unconscious? And I do see it basically as like a will to be what we are, where what we really are is something beyond mere matter, beyond body, something that structures body, something that makes us what we are. I think you have to afford some kind of powers to the individual, or else you get a weird kind of like infinite regress of causation. Like if you don't really do anything, you don't have the power to make an original alteration to the universe, then where do the real causal powers sit? Is everything directly caused by the Big Bang? Right? Like, what's the point in us existing as an individual thing if we don't have some power that is unique to us? So I think that power resides in our soul, and our soul is what structures and informs our bodily nature. So the more we live in the image of our truer self, which is more formal and less material, the more that process of choice will be informed by our true nature, and it'll be aimed at the true good. But yeah, freedom isn't in choice. Freedom is in exercising our proper nature. That's how I see it.
Well, what if your nature is an expression of the one, and therefore the actions that you're going to take are so-called predetermined because that expression is, for example, let's suppose this thing goes left and one goes right. Well, you have no choice but to go left if you're a left person and right if you're a right. But those expressions of this one thing, or let's many things, let's go infinite directions. You're just one of those directions going this way or that way. So the will is actually the cosmic God will, and you're just that expression of that will. So like, because I'm more of a pantheist, if you will, or panentheist or something like, I can't explain exactly, because my biggest question is this. I do believe that the universe is either God itself or it's a subconscious. I don't know if it's aware of itself. Like for example, let's take a small seed, okay, of a flower. A flower seed has the ability to become this beautiful flower. At its smallest point, it's just this seed. There's no complexity to it other than what's inside the DNA code, but it sprouts this beautiful bouquet of flowers or whatever the case. Now, what if God is a simple thing? It's not super smart, but it's able to make everything that is super smart. And so in a way it is super smart, but it expresses itself in these super smart entities. And the choices that these things make are just mathematical outcomes of all the possibilities, kind of like that. You see what I mean? So you get what I'm saying? It's like what you're doing is just an outcome of what's supposed to happen. You are that thing which does the things. Your whole life has been played out in a certain, and you're just observing that life play. You know what I mean? So it's like
Mhm.
when you have a dream, you don't really control your dreams, but you observe them, and sometimes you feel like you control your dreams. Like you have this, what do they call it? Not fluid dreams,
Lucid.
lucid dreams, right? You're like, oh, I'm going to choose to do this. I'm going to go upstairs. Well, how do you know you chose that? It feels like you chose. See, choice is a feeling in a sense. Like you feel like I was earlier today. I was trying to remember if I had a certain memory or not, and I couldn't feel if it was true. And I'm like, damn, if I can't have that feeling that confirms that that memory is true, did that event actually happen? Like deja vu. People say deja vu is this part of your brain that confirms something happened already, going off when it's not supposed to. Like there are times I'm watching a movie that hasn't come out yet, and I go, I've already seen this movie, and I'm like, no, dude, this is the commercial for it. I'm like, yeah, but I've seen it already. Now, that's impossible. But what's happening is the part of my brain that ensures or confirms that I saw something is going off when it shouldn't be. And they're like, what's the next scene? Like, I don't know what the next scene is. And I don't because I never saw it. So there could be some like kind of glitch in the mind or something of the brain. And you could say, well, yeah, we are a soul, but it looks like we're in this spacesuit that we're kind of like playing around with. Now, the question is, are we even in control of the spacesuit? I don't know. So I go with there is no free will. And that doesn't mean we're like autonomons or automatons and that everything's like, I guess you could say it is. It's truly a mystery to me. But ever since I've let go of this idea that I control things, I've gained more control. And that's I learned from the Tao, man. Like you're going upriver and you're fighting this river. You want to change, and you just go with the river instead, and you go down with it. And the cosmic will becomes your will, and now you have
Right.
free will because that's the cosmic will,
Right.
rather than going with the ego and resisting. No, I want this to be, and I want that to be, and it causes all the suffering, which tells you you're probably not supposed to go that way. Now, that again, I make a differentiation in my book. There's suffering and there's unnecessary suffering. So if you're gonna, break your leg, you're gonna suffer. You can't skip that, unless you put yourself in hypnosis. There's necessary suffering and there's unnecessary suffering. Unnecessary suffering is the suffering you put on top of the suffering you don't need to put because you are resisting what is, and that is hatred. What you resist what is, you're hating it. If you love something for what it is, doesn't mean you love it like a hippie, you hug it. You just, okay, I accept this is the reality, what it is. And I'm not okay with it, but I'm going along with it. Like my suspension, right? 3 months. I go, well, the old me would flip out. Oh my God, I can't believe that. Now I'm just like, I guess that's what happened. Oh, well, get a vacation, get to work on other things. That's how I reacted to the suspension versus, oh my God, this is unfair. So I would have added unnecessary suffering because I can't reverse the suspension by yelling at the computer. I can't throw things. Nothing changes. And when my PTSD started to hit me years ago, I used to throw things and break phones and do stupid punch walls. I used to do all sorts of crazy stuff, and nothing changed. It just made everything worse. Now I broke my phone. So not only was I mad, I have to buy a $400 phone because I smashed it out of anger. It's so stupid. But that intoxicating feeling of the ego makes you feel like you have power to destroy something and have control. But in reality, you're just hurting yourself. And that's what a lot of people do when it comes to drugs, alcohol, or whatever other addictions, right? So, where was I going with this? I'm basically saying that there is a cosmic will, and you are the person that is playing it out. That's what I'm trying to say. So your will doesn't really exist. It's an illusion from my view. And you identify with the cosmic will, then suddenly you are making these choices. But it's really just already going on, if that makes any sense. I guess that's
Yeah.
hard
Yeah, I get what
determinism.
you're saying. I think there's a vertical aspect of freedom and a horizontal aspect of freedom, and they both have to be present. The horizontal aspect is that determinism doesn't actually hold in the physical universe. I think because the many worlds interpretation is true. There are multiple ways in which the physical universe could evolve at any point. It's actually not deterministically related in a Newtonian sense, right? Because the fundamental constituents of the universe are in states of superposition where they admit of multiple possible transformations. And those things are not actually set. And we don't really understand why the collapse of the wave function occurs in one way rather than another. So that is a space for the cosmic will to deliberate on how it might possibly evolve. We can imagine the universe going from that seed Big Bang into all sorts of different end states. And so there is some degree, like, choice is necessary to happen there, just because if it's if you don't make the choice, then nothing collapses the wave function, nothing brings about a deterministic classical reality. Everything would always be that wash of potentiality, and you wouldn't get concrete things. So it connects with the vertical aspect, though, because what you're talking about is very true. Where if you identify with a false self, then you'll be more enslaved. If you identify with the body, you think that you are your body. The appetites of the body will dominate you and make you like more subject to your circumstances. People who are addicted to things lose freedom in some sense when you identify with higher aspects of yourself and you transcend your individual self and identify with more that cosmic will, the will of God, try to align your will with the will of God, then you do have that true freedom in some sense. But I don't think that the illusory state affects nothing. I think illusions are real. Like,
Well, yeah,
yes, the self is an illusion, but it's real and it has real consequences. And so when you identify with what is more like universal, absolute, formal rather than material in Platonist terms, when you're able to do that, then the way that the cosmic soul evolves for you in like the timeline that you experience will actually be better. That's like a perfect, the horizontal and vertical come together. If you ascend in what you're identifying with, then the horizontal choices will be guided by a global providence rather than local desires and ambition and very like, you know, myopic choices that individuals make. So I think you're right in some way about, it's about identifying with something that is bigger than us and that does allow for more like fluent action. But I think that also there's two sides of that, where on the one hand, like if you're a musician, you never learned music theory and you never rationalized about what you're doing, you play by ear, play by the heart, you're going to have a certain kind of fluency because you're not stopping to analyze. And that is a kind of flow state, but it's not as good as the flow state that you get on the other side of the rationalization. I think there's inspired states that are more kind of precognitive, and then there are inspired states that are post philosophical. So I don't think that rational philosophy is the highest human activity. I do think like mystic inspiration is higher than rational philosophy, and you only get that though once you've ascended the ladder of the various grades of identity that you can identify with. I think what happens with a lot of people who pursue ego death is a kind of delusion where they think that they can go straight from being addicted to drugs to like identifying with Godhead.
mhm.
And I don't think you can skip those steps. You got to trace all the steps back, which means you're going to have to go through the philosophical life. I think it's more of a gradualistic process to get to the end state. But yeah, what do you think of that? The intersection of like the vertical and the horizontal, and that freedom, uh, really consisting in like how does the universe as a whole evolve?
Well,
I think,
isn't it a freedom to submit? Because the cosmic will means that there's a will that's pretty much wants to do something that isn't really you, isn't it?
or is it you? Well, that's the
Well,
question.
then we would be God, and that's kind of like this Hindu Brahmin type of thing. Which
Mhm.
I don't know. I mean, aren't you a Christian Platonist? I'd actually want to
Yes.
ask you about that later. Um, because I've learned from Sadhguru and all these people, and they believe that we're all God, and God basically had a dream and split himself up because he was alone and he wanted to forget himself, and the whole point is to find himself back into one being. So in India, when you say I'm God, everyone goes, "Yeah, so what? Who cares? Obviously, you are." Something like that. Where over here, it's blasphemy. What? You're not God? This and that. Um, my thing is like I go back to this expression of God, right? I want you to imagine like a ball, and it has, or like my hand. Okay, so here's my hand. This whole hand is called God. Here's me, here's you, here's this, and this could be infinite different forms. And this thing is just making different forms over and over. It's moving all the time. It's changing forms. And the will of this thing is the nature of the thing, right? I mean, just like the ocean doesn't have a will, it has a nature, and it moves the way. And you either go with the ocean and you ride the surf wave, or you splash into it and make a mess. So when you go with it, you become one with the flow and one with God's will, or the ocean's nature. In other words, God's nature. Now you fulfill it and things start to work for you. Or maybe your experience is supposed to be in a car accident and you're supposed to die. Because look, this thing has to have infinite outcomes, right? So like some of the outcomes are not good. Some of the outcomes is becoming a burn victim. How'd you get in that situation? And someone in the chat asked, are you always the same person your whole life? I say no. Because when I look back at myself as a teenager, I go, who the hell is this idiot? Why did he do those things? What caused him to do those things? Is that even me? I didn't even look like that kid anymore. And that's an interesting situation. And I wrote in my book, all we are is change. We're literally constantly changing over and over again. We keep evolving. We are not the same person. We're always changing all the time. And the only thing that keeps us the same person is this memory of what we used to be. But if I erase your memory, who are you? If I delete your memory completely and you don't forget to walk or anything like that, I just delete Arvel, all your stories, everything. And I go, hey man, how are you? Huh? Who am I? It's like you're a different person, right?
Mhm.
It's completely all the ego is a bunch of memories and experiences and a storyline. Without that storyline, well, what are you? You're that consciousness that experiences and recognizes and remembers and goes through the storyline. So the real you is the consciousness. I guess you can call it a soul, but the false self is that story. It's the narrative. So, when it goes to these making choices, well, who's making these choices? The choices that 18-year-old Lucas Gage made were stupid. I would never make those. The desires he had are completely different than what I have now. So what happened there? What was going on there? Maybe that was the being on the off path, right? Now I'm on the right path. Children, father, fighting for justice, where this guy's all selfish, chase women, do drugs, party, selfish, selfish, selfish. The ego wants more, more power, power. It wants to control who's talking shit about me, who's doing this, which girl likes me, which one does. That's all egotism. It's fear, right? Once you deal with the fear and all the crap you go through that phase in life, suddenly you let go of that shell, and then you start aligning yourself with what I would call the cosmic will. But then one could argue, wasn't that also the cosmic will? Because that process must happen for me to learn to make better choices. Again, what I say, the choices that we're making are learning. We are experiencing the learning process. We are witnessing the learning process. In other words, recording it. We are live streaming the recording process and thinking we're making that happen. But all you got to do is go back and go, what the hell was I thinking drinking and driving? What the hell was I thinking dating that crazy bitch at 18? That girl was nuts. Why am I even dating her? You don't know why. So who was that person and why did you go through those things? I think it's a learning process. So yeah, and to go back to the vertical, and if you want to explain to me what do you mean by that, and I'll try to answer it there. Um, Go ahead. Yeah, try to.
Yeah, well, like you were saying, we have to explore all the possibilities, the
Yeah.
ways the universe could evolve. And that means there are different timelines available. And so where you find yourself exists at that level of horizontal choice. It's not fully determined. If we lived in a Newtonian universe, then your past would determine your personal future in one timeline. But if your past states are equally compatible with multiple future states, like in a chess game, right?
Mhm.
The same set of previous moves is open to a variety of futures. Like some systems can have that property. I think the physical universe, as it actually exists, has that property, where the future is not fully determined by past conditions, because again, like the basic components of the universe exist in that quantum superposition
Right,
where
right.
they don't have one position, they're a field of possibilities. Those are real possibilities that we have access to. So I think there is freedom there. But the vertical dynamic was as you identify with more local aspects of yourself, more particular aspects, like yourself as an embodied person with your particular conditioning in this life is more particular than your soul. And your soul is more particular than absolute consciousness, which perhaps at the ultimate level you are, right? The soul is a necessary structure in reality, just like the forms are necessary principles in reality. Like triangles exist, not just particular triangles, but there is such a thing as triangularity itself. There is such a thing as
Yeah.
redness itself, beauty itself. These forms have some subsistence, and they're less particular than their instantiations. So we, as embodied beings, are particular instantiations of our soul, which is the form that embodies in us. So I think basically I would move that soul away from the absolute, put it between our person, which is mutable, our personality, and how our body changes too. Um, the soul exists between that and that absolute consciousness, where just in principle, like pure subjectivity, like the observer of everything is kind of necessarily the same, because in order to differentiate differences, we need some locus of perspective from which they can stand out. Like within the subject, it's impossible to really conceive of fundamental differences. Like pure subjectivity is always the same. It has to be simple.
Yeah.
So I think that is what we are at the most fundamental level. And if it's possible for a person to identify at that level, that would be they are basically the same being that Jesus was, the same being that Krishna was. They're identifying with the universal consciousness, and they will guide their universe towards the best of all possible, like horizontal paths of cosmic evolution. So as you identify with the absolute highest aspect of yourself, then you move your universe as a whole towards the perfect world and not an imperfect world. You go down the ladder and identify with an embodied experience or like how you're feeling right now. You're going to make choices that are aimed at that local good and not the greater good. And obviously, a greater good is better than a smaller good. Did that make sense?
Yeah. So I think I don't subscribe to the multi worlds like you do. For so I
Okay.
don't see how they manifest. I mean, there's potential, right? So I'm at a crossroads. There's three roads. I could choose three roads, but only one is going to happen no matter what. There is no could have. See, could have to me is just a fantasy. Like I could have turned left. Yeah, you could have, but I didn't, and there was no other way possible. There was no turn left, even though it's presented. I don't buy it because think about this: if the in many worlds theory argues that every action or thought opens another world, there's so many worlds, it's impossible for even how could they even manifest numerically? What no, it's infinite, right? It's almost like they don't happen. And so, like, if I move my arm like this, I could have moved it like this. I could have moved my finger like this. I could have done so many. Is that the kind of world you're talking about, where every single possible thing? And I'm just one person, and we're not even talking about my toes. We're not talking about my chair. We're not talking. There's so many things going on. It's almost an absurdity that these things. Now, there's potential, of course. I could go this way. I could go this way, but that doesn't mean that those worlds exist anywhere, right? There's just an opening, if you will. Now, if you can imagine a calculator, you know, when you put a calculator toward the light, you could see all the numbers kind of, right? Like you could kind of see like all the zeros and stuff like that.
Old school calculators.
Yeah, yeah. In old school calculator, you kind of see like, well, that all the potential for those numbers are there, but you're only going to press one. And when you press one, that one shows up no matter what the angle is. So that's the way I look at it. So when I look at the worlds theory, first of all, where do these worlds exist in? Right? There has to be like, so if there's a multiverse, there must be a motherverse that puts all these other, and then if there's an infinite amount of them, how are they contained? How do they ever become anything? Like if I were to say, Arvel, if I throw a ball at you and it takes an infinite amount of time to get to you, does it ever get thrown, or does it ever get to you? Like nothing happens. It's almost like nothing takes place. So something infinite, it can't be physical. So these worlds that you referred to, they don't really, in my view, exist at all. They're just imagination. They're possible, but only one of them is going to become this reality. There's only one reality, and this is it. And there
What
was
about the
no other way.
past? Is the past actual?
The past is gone. It's fantasy. There's
Oh,
only
so
the
the past
eternal.
isn't real
It's an
either.
eternal now. Everything's happening. The future and the past are both in our minds. So if I forget, like for example, I can go to a work site that was built. It's still there. It's not like that vanishes, right? This isn't like Stephen King's The Langoliers, where like these creatures eat the. I don't know if you ever saw that movie, but these creatures come in to eat up the past. It doesn't exist, right? I obviously there is a thing, but for me to go back there, it's still there's only one time, is what I'm saying. Across the entire universe, or whatever this existence is, there's only one eternal now. That's it. From my view, there's only one eternal now. The past is the lessons in our mind that are, that happened. We all accept it, whatever the case. The future is a fantasy of what could happen, but there's only one outcome, right? So, for example, there's a soccer game scheduled Friday or tomorrow. Either one of those teams are going to win. We don't know which team. The only way that game doesn't happen if it's canceled, right? So if the game happens, one of those teams are going to win if it goes to death match, right? Shooting, it's inevitable. It's impossible to avoid it unless the universe explodes or the game is canceled, right? Something like this. So that is the future that will happen. And one of those teams are going to win. We don't know which team is going to win, but one of those teams is going to win. Our inability to know which team isn't going to win doesn't mean the team that's going to win or supposed to win is going to win. So I feel like you think there's a way that one team that should win isn't going to win, or something's going to. I don't think there's a change to the end result of that one team is going to win. Like you and I are going to die one day. Our deaths are coming no matter what. We don't know what they are. They could be 80 years from now, not 80, but a few decades from now. It could be tomorrow. I could die right now during this live stream. I'll have a heart attack for some reason. We have no idea. Was that supposed to happen? The answer is yeah, but supposed to doesn't mean that there was a plan. It just is what it is. And I feel like that's where I've concluded in my life. A lot of times in philosophy, we want to know exactly what causes this. What if there are no causes? What if everything just is spontaneously going on? That this, because I believe everything's one. I'm a monist, if you will. That this one thing is like an ocean that goes, and it goes through its nature, and it's moving around, and one wave is bigger than it. Just does it. And some people die early, some babies die, some people live to 105. So where are these choices being made? If this is thing, if we're all attached to this one thing, if we are this one thing, if we are expressions of this one thing, where is this choice that's being made? So if this one thing put itself, for example, how about this? Like I thought of this the other day when I was driving. Imagine you have binoculars, right? That have tubes of multiple lenses that go in every direction. Are you seeing everything at once? I don't know if that's possible, right? Can the human eye see all these different circles? I don't know. And if you had to focus on one thing, you could only see on one thing. Or put it like this: let's suppose God is a circle, and this circle has these cameramen that are popping out of it, and there's wires that go back to this cameraman, and each cameraman is picking up a different perspective from its view, but it's going back to the source. You get what I'm saying? So it's just this is going this way, this one's going this way, this one's a baby, this one's a Chinaman, this one's an African, this guy's a fish, and all the eternal consciousness has gone into all forms, and all these forms are recording their experiences and going back to the source, making it omniscient. There's no other way it could be omniscient unless it's all things that could be omniscient, that have consciousness. So mathematically, if you want to put it that way, even this thing doesn't have it has a nature that goes its own way. I don't know if it's choosing, well, I'm going to swim left or right, or I don't know. These are answers I don't know.
Right. So do you think that one thing exists in time then, fundamentally?
Yeah, time to me isn't a measurement. That's all it is. I don't think there's a space. Like I know we have space time, and basically it's entropy, right? This thing go from one state to another. That's time. So in order to have no time, if God exists outside of time, he would never move. That's why I'm concerned with the unmoved mover. Someone says, well, infinite regress, there's an unmoved mover. Okay, how does it do anything? If it's change, they say God's changeless. Well, then how does it move anything? What state does it do to move something or create something? That's the question I have. Well, maybe it's always. What if it's always moving? What if it's an unmoved mover, or it's a moving mover that's always moving, always, and never stop moving ever, and it's always changing and always moving around, and it just goes, and there's no explanation for it, and it's self-referencing, and it just goes on forever. I mean, that to me makes more sense than there's just a thing that's static and then it does something out of nowhere. So there's an infinite amount of time because time doesn't exist in this state, and then one day it just goes pop and everything happens. I don't know. To me, it doesn't make sense. It makes more sense if this thing is always moving, unless movement is also an illusion. For example, when we go to sleep, we have a dream, right? Well, Arvel's just laying in his bed. Meanwhile, his mind is moving all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
So what if the imagination doesn't need to move, and this is all imagined? So that could explain an unmoved mover that doesn't need to move. Then it moves things because it's imagining things. I don't know, man. I'm just spitballing.
That was good stuff.
You know,
I would say that the God mind entertaining all possibility through time, where time is also fundamental, isn't a strict monism, because then you have God in time, and time has past and future, and that involves a primordial duality. So to really have monism, you do need that unmoved mover behind it. The way I would think about it is, let's start from that premise that God contemplates all possibility, experiences all things through infinite time in some sense. Well, then all possibilities are necessarily exhausted, right? Because he didn't start at a particular time, he's not going to finish at a particular time. He wouldn't be absolute. He'd be much more hemmed in if that were the case. You have to really suppose this time to be infinite. Then all possibility will be fully actualized, all truths will be returned to God, and all possibility of knowledge also, because we can't leave the knowing process out of this. Like, why go through all of this business of living all these lives? It's to learn lessons, as you said. So there are lessons about how all of these lives relate, lessons about karmic dynamics, lessons about how universes can, in principle, coordinate and form. And there are counterfactual truths, from our perspective, counterfactual truths about how the universe could have been but isn't. Those truths are realities that are possible, right? And for God to collect all possibility, exhaust all possibility, all of those truths of possible worlds have to ultimately feed back and inform his omniscience. Now, whatever point you start this process from, this is going to be a little bit of a complicated point, but wherever you are in this timeline, you're already presupposing God's nature, because God is ultimate, that allows the whole process to unfold. So if you're suggesting that there is this time in which God does these things, then you're supposing a kind of underlying dynamics that God, the nature of God, obeys. And how did that dynamics come into being? Why is God's nature precisely what it is? Now, one possibility is that God somehow runs this experiment of living all possible lives through all possible universes, knowing all possible truth, and that's how he grounds then the true nature of the absolute. He knows himself in that way, that collects itself into this fixed nature that never changes. Because no matter what slice in the timeline you suppose, that underlying nature is constant. That's what's fixed. That's what's always there. That's the unmoved mover, the eternal exempt aspect of God. So Platonists talk about, the one, which is beyond all things. They talk about the intellective God, which is the God that holds all of the forms in his mind. And then they also talk about the God that is the universe itself, which is in time. And that's where time emerges with the world soul, which is kind of the third God, the third hypostasis. So yeah, I think you need the exempt unitive aspect for monism to hold. And if you don't want the monism, then there are explanatory problems you'll run into. Is like you have two first principles. Well, how are they joined? You need a common term for two first principles. There is a plurality. Again, there's some common field in which that plurality consists. So I think ultimately, maybe it's just a factor of the way the human reason works. Who knows? But in order to build a good explanation of the world, you need to terminate in one first principle. So you need that unitive aspect of God that is like divinely simple, beyond contemplation. You also need the intellective God that holds all those truths. That's the product that God gets from running all of these experiments. The sum of all wisdom, knowledge, truth. That has to subsist somewhere, and that's that intellective mind. And then the third mind is the mind in time. And in a weird way, you can sort of think of that third temporal God as grounding the truths of the intellective God. I mean, ultimately, there's a feedback loop because in order for the world soul to run its experiment, the forms have to be there already to create particular instantiations. Like, in order for me to live this life, the form of man already has to exist. And yet, I'm learning lessons about human nature. And that's how, in this philosophy we're talking about, God would ultimately learn human natures through our learning of human nature. And yet, human nature precedes my particular experience. So it's a feedback cycle that only makes sense in eternity. From the perspective of time, it's always incomplete. I also think that in some sense you are right in that like the entire multiverse, all possible worlds don't like exist right now in space. Like that would be the wrong way of conceiving of it.
Yeah, that's what I mean by that. Like they're not
Yeah,
like I can't go to the multiverse where I go left. Like I can't travel there is what I'm saying.
right.
They're
But
potentials, of course, but I think that things unfold in just the way they do now. There's only one way they unfold, and that's how things are. The isness of it is now is what it is. That's it. There's no could have been. I could have turned left. No, you couldn't have. There's the idea and fantasy that you could have turned left, but every decision you made and the situation how it unfolded, there was no turning left. And this kind of
well,
thinking eliminates
let me just
suffering.
ask one question here
Yeah, go ahead.
first. So if you continued through like an infinite cycle of lives and you looped back around to be Lucas Gage,
Hmm.
where previously you had turned right, now couldn't what happens be a left hand turn?
Well, no, yeah. If there's different loops and different choices being made, you're playing out different scenarios. That's different. I'm saying in this one, there's only this way. In this current life, I only turned right. There's no other way. And therefore, the mistake that I made turning right, I can't be so hard on myself because there was no other way. The other way that I could have turned left wasn't going to happen in this life, in this reality, in this universe, in your language that you'd use. In this universe, Lucas Gage turned right, and the car accident that took place, it just happened. It's not my exact fault, even though I'm the one driving. I can't be so hard on myself because I could not have turned left, even though the option was there. All the choices, the chemistry, the thought process, my history, the future, all the things that organism, the entire universe choosing. It's almost like the entire universe chose right. The entire universe played right. Because also the car being that I smashed into was coming in from another way and had its whole the person that just I smashed into has a whole story and whole history behind them and the future process. You see how many like there's almost an infinite number of causes for this cause to happen. It's almost like nothing caused this thing. It just happened. Like a
Right.
phenomenon. You see what I mean? So like I it's kind of strange when it's almost paradoxical what I'm saying, but it's not because there was no like when we go, man, if I only came 5 minutes earlier, I would have saved your life. There is no way you could have came 5 minutes earlier. Only in fantasy world. So maybe that's the possible world that you're talking about. In the fantasy world, I could have took the train 10 minutes earlier, not got into that fight on the train with the conductor without, there could have been a trillion different possibilities, but none of them are real. The only real world is you got late, the person got in a car accident, and now they're in the hospital and you feel like crap. That's the only world that exists. You know what I mean? Does that make sense to you?
I'm not sure because let's see. If you take it back up to um, you know, God's going through this whole process in every possible way, all of these different choices will be necessary. So, you being what you are, your choices were necessitated. Like, your being as you are is inevitable. But I think it might just be a kind of like anthropic illusion that this is the only real world and all the other worlds are just potential. They're potential to you, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're ontologically potential. Because then, what is the real status of potentials versus the real status of actuals? Um, I'm going to explain like the way I kind of see indeterminism broadly and see what you think of that, and then we can go from
Let me
there.
ask you one question. Do you think God could have focus on more than one thing?
Yes, because he's not in time. So I think the whole process of living out all possible worlds, it would be more accurate to picture God as this one locus of universal identity, and he projects out in all possible directions, in all possible experiences simultaneously. And it's that some of those simultaneous actions of Godhead weave together into coherent timelines. And we are that experience of the timelines, but God is actually experiencing all of it together. Because I don't think God exists in time.
So we're like all an eyeball of God, kind of, because that's when I kind of like
Yeah.
I consider ourselves, each one of us, a cameraman of God. Like I'm sitting here like, all right,
Mm-hmm.
this is Lucas Gage's experience uploading the information to this mega mind, if you will. That's one way to see it. Is that what you're saying? Pretty
Yeah,
much.
but there are different grades, like different levels of descent, different levels of intelligence. Like the
Yeah, of course, like
differences
a
are
cow,
real.
obviously a
Yeah,
cow and an ant, if it even has consciousness.
sure.
Um, okay,
Mm-hmm.
so what were you going to say just now? You were going to do
Yeah, yeah. So it's this issue where all of the other worlds don't exist right now. And I think space is a measure, time is a measure, as you were saying, and it's
yeah.
measured by the ultimate measure of all things, which is the one, which is the core of our being and of all possible being. And the one performs all of that measurement. There's no difference between the acts of the one and the essence of the one because it's one. So all of that is together in its like ultimate simplicity. But that doesn't mean then that like for God, he sees the entire multiverse in space and time extended. Extension is a property of this kind of lower level of existence that we've descended to, where
Mhm.
we experience separation. That separation like informs the nature of the one in some way, so we are bringing information back. There's a reciprocal feedback between like the absolute and ourselves, I think. But the way I see it is like necessarily a finite identity, and our experience is finite,
Yeah.
right? A finite identity in an infinite context is not fully deterministic. Imagine that space is infinite extent and all possible worlds like exist in one really big space. If you want to look at where does a given identity exist, like planet Earth exactly as it is right now, modern physicists will say that, well, if space is infinite, then a certain distance away, you're going to find a clone of the Earth, right?
Mm.
Because you have infinite space, statistically, you're going to run into the exact same thing. And so if you're a finite identity, you only interact with so much stuff, then the set of everything you're interacting with, which may include distant stars, the entire observable universe, that whole thing doesn't exist in one location in this infinite extension of space because what would define its location as there rather than some other point? From the perspective of you on Earth as you are now, there is no way to discern whether you're at point A in this infinite expanse of space or point B, because A and B are identical, truly identical. So you'd have to come up with some other thing that differentiates A from B besides all of the causal interactions that you're engaged with. We know that our causal interactions are finite. So I would just say, fine, then we don't exist in one expanse of space where it's like a Cartesian grid with its each point has like a unique coordinate that identifies it. Instead, like every point that is a measure is the center. There is one universal center, there's one origin, all points are that point ultimately. But we measure space and, in a way, create space and time from exactly where we are. So, if the core of our being is that one, is that simplicity, and we descend into separation and extension, that only goes to a limited extent. And so, in that sense, this is the only world in a way, because we're exercising God's omnipotence in a limited form, God wanting to forget himself. I know it doesn't sound Christian. I
Well, that's I know
reconcile.
you
We
didn't
talk
you
about
study
it.
the Bhagavad Gita at one point, or weren't
Bhagavad
you
Gita.
into
Yeah.
yeah Bhagavad Gita? So you kind of have a Hinduistic back.
Interpretation.
Yeah, I was used to watch Sadhguru, and he would say similar things like that, like the Brahmin went to bed, and he something like this, and he forgot himself. Because I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I had a ketamine trip once that was very interesting. I was the singularity, and I was aware of myself, and I was like the only thing in existence, and I felt it. I felt as myself. I was a ball. I was a tiny ball, and I had the outer view of myself, and I go, "Hello, is anyone there? Hello, is this it? Hello?" And I was I was so sad, and I see like, wow, if I was that ball, I would blow myself up just to see what, forget that
Mm-hmm.
I'm alone in a way. And
Mm-hmm.
now that was on ketamine, and I was it was a drug trip, but it really hit me. I'm like, man, if because think about it, being God, if you know everything, then you know you're by yourself. You know you've always been there. I mean, and then the question comes, how does he even know? He wasn't created. How does God know everything himself? How does he know he's omnipotent, omniscient? How does he know
Right.
any of these things? Are these things even possible? Is another question, right? So these are
Right.
things we've contributed to God, like he's omnipresent. Well, that means there's not a pixel in the universe where he's not, if it's made of pixels. If he's omniscient, there's not a thing he doesn't know. But then there are things he can't know. He cannot know what it's like to be dead. He cannot know what it's like not to exist. I know what it's like not to exist. I could just go back and think of 1940. I'd be like, I wasn't around. I know what it's like to be unconscious. Does he?
Well, I don't know about that. Do you really know what
Well, I
it's
mean, I
like
could
not
imagine a
to exist?
blankness. Well, I know what
Yeah.
it's like. Well, put it this way. I know what it's like to go under the knife. You just don't know. It's a weird, right? You've ever been under, you ever been knocked out by,
No. No, I haven't.
you never took surgery. You never been blacked out before
No
and you
anesthesia.
never lost conscious.
Well, I mean, I've like blacked out standing up too fast, that kind of
Yeah.
thing.
So if you lose conscious, you know the experience of losing conscious. There's no experience. It's
As
literally
long as you remember what it's like, there was an experience. You remember the loss of
right.
consciousness.
So like,
So,
and that's what Alan Watts says about death. Like everyone fears death, but you can't experience a non-experience. And he's
mhm,
like, what's the difference if you die and come back as a baby with no memories, or you die and a baby's born? What's the difference? It's kind of the same thing, isn't it? You're the baby that's back, but you don't know it's you, and you don't have any memories of yourself. You're kind of a clean slate. So I think about death often. Not that I'm scared of it. I go, it's like you go to bed and never wake up. It's pretty weird. And what was that? Was it Socrates who said sleepless, a permanent slumber? I forgot which philosopher it was, but I know we're jumping all over the place. But I think
yeah.
of
I think it
I
might have been Epicurus, the Epicurean argument.
yeah, it's like I'm not afraid to die because I know that at one point I didn't exist. But then the argument is, what if I did exist and I just don't remember? Like if I can't remember what I
Uh,
had, 10 birthdays ago, what if I had 1,000 lives ago? I don't remember. I was something. Who knows? We don't know, man.
right. I
It's interesting.
I
But
think we can think a little bit more about that question of could God know that he was the absolute being?
yeah,
Because it's related to the question really of like, why is there something rather than nothing? Was it inevitable that something existed? The way I've thought about that question is, to say that nothing exists, that's already invoking the something nothing
mhm.
conceptual dichotomy. So for there to be nothing, there has to be something to set it against because we mean something by nothing. So nothingness already invokes something. So conceptually, at least, there's no possibility of pure nothing. Whenever someone postulates that possible reality, it already invalidates itself. And so it does seem, if reason is a guide, and maybe reason is limited here and we can't conceive of pure nothing, whatever that would be, it seems like it has to be something there. And if you want to say that, okay, it's something rather than nothing, like it's some one thing that exists and identity, then that also invokes the kind of conceptual schema of something and nothing and that schema is beyond the absolute. We're asking, what is the necessary being? What is the necessary reality? Is there one way things had to be? And I would say that it can't be that things had to be one way, because any concrete identity in a fixed sense, again, invokes the kind of conceptual scheme, the syntactic scheme that gives it identity. I don't think identity in that sense is like the primal thing. That's why in Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, and Sufism, God is predicated. We describe God indirectly and apophatically rather than cataphatically. Apophatic predication is saying what God is not. In the Upanishads, the phrase is neti, neti, not this, not
Hmm.
this.
Yeah.
So we have to like reconcile ourselves to the fact that the ultimate reality has to be beyond all categories, beyond all knowledge of necessity. If we want to postulate like a particular nature as the ultimate, that invalidates itself just as much as the possibility of pure nothingness invalidates itself. So I do think, as far as we can conceive of it, there is like a necessary being that we can only kind of point at. There can't be nothing. There can't just be one arbitrary something. There has to be something that transcends identity and escapes the possibility of non-existence.
Right.
And that sounds like the descriptions from classical theism, from Hinduism of Brahman, of course. Um,
Well, even Tao said the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao, right? You cannot describe it. You can't. Those who think they know it don't know it, and those who don't know it know it. It's like these
yes.
weird, paradoxical, contradictory statements, but that's what it is. It's like a strange loop. It's like it shouldn't happen, but it does happen. And I don't think non-existence is possible, just like you said. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. People, why is there something rather than nothing? Because it is. It's just the way it is. There is no way that there could be nothing. Otherwise, there would be nothing. Why would there be something? Where would it come from? When I had this trip and I was this ball and I was all alone, I had thoughts about, am I the only one? And that's where I question about omniscience.
Mm-hmm.
Could this thing know? And Alan Watts he said something, the Godhead can never know itself, just like a knife can never cut itself. It can't know itself completely. So perhaps these experiences that you and I are it trying to look at itself. And there are people who believe that this thing became man so that it could be experienced. Oh, look, this is what I look like from the inside, kind
Right.
of thing like that. There's that argument. There's because how could one know? How could the God know? Hey, I'm the only one that exists. Just me floating in this. Where is it floating, by the way? If there's no space time, what is it doing? How can it do anything? These are some questions I have that I'm sure you have too. Because when I think of God, I think of this disc. I think of a disc of some sort. and,
Okay.
and where is it? And that's why I don't believe in this duality where there's the classic theism where God created something out of ex nihilo, right? Ex nihilo. Because what did it create it with? If God is the only that exists, it used itself to make other things. And therefore, those things are actually parts of itself.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's just one giant thing. When I say I'm a monist, I'm saying that everything's made of the same stuff. And that's why I was attracted to
Mm-hmm.
Bernardo Kastrup's analytic idealism, because he pretty much solves the mind body problem. But then someone could argue, well, you could just take mental stuff and say physical stuff. And now you're back to the same problem in a way. Um, because how do you account for the transcendentals? Where is number two? Where
Exactly.
is the triangle? Well, if those things are made of mental stuff and the universe is made of mental stuff, well, what's the problem now? You say you need a mind, but we've never seen a disembodied mind. The only minds we've seen are in human beings and animals. I don't even know if animals have them. What if creativity is a force? What if creativity just makes things? What if God is just a creative force and isn't a mind? It's just a thing that makes shapes. It just does this. So I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
I thought of it today, actually. I said, what if God's not a mind, but a force of creation? Like what is will? What is creativity? See, now if a mind has creativity, then what does that mean? I have a creative mind. Does that
Yeah.
mean my mind is creative or my creativity is my mind? I mean, what does that even mean? So like
I
if
think,
God is,
yeah,
you see what I
creativity
mean?
involves time, and that makes it posterior to mind. Just because, again, for a process of creation to happen, you're presupposing a dynamics of how that operates. At least you're presupposing time and like various identities that come into being and perhaps go out of being. And so that's not like fundamentally simple. That goes back to this problem of like the necessary being can't be some one identity. And if it's a process of creation, we have that
But
one
isn't this
identity
the
as a
issue?
temporal engine of
Here,
sorts.
here's the thing I had with Andrew Wilson. I remember I spoke to him about like this creative stuff because we argued, well, I argued, what if nothing was created? What if everything that we see here has always been around in different forms? What happens is this thing changes forms. So it doesn't create anything. It turns into everything and it's not created. So again, like the theist viewpoint is there's a God. He uses his uncreated energies to make other things that are different than his energies or something like this, right? So there's the circle and there's the universe. But what if this God just turns into everything? What's been created? Nothing. It just has different forms. Like
what if both
if
are true though?
I don't know. See, that's what I'm saying. I don't make I don't say that I know for a fact I'm right. I think it's crazy when someone says, I know exactly what happens when you die and God said this. It's like, no, you believe that though. It's fine, but I don't think you know. Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm right. Who knows? But for me, it's like, in order for this thing to do anything, and if this was a thing that existed beyond space time, whatever that even means, because there's only one now, and it does something out of time which it exists, I think it's just changing forms. And it kind of sounds like energy to us. You see, look, energy cannot be created nor destroyed, and it goes from one form to another. Kind of sounds like God to me. God has never been created nor destroyed, and it seems to me he turns in every single form. And you and I are just one of his temporary forms, and then we will go back to the source and become another form. I mean, isn't that kind of what happens?
Well, what about the vertical dimension of form, like the spectrum of intelligence? Where does that go? What is the summit of intelligence? Is that just some arbitrary point? It seems like that's a very special kind of thing. I also don't think that God is a mind. I think God is superior to mind. I think God is superior to being beyond like being as a fixed identity. A being is an essence. I think God is not an essence. God doesn't even, I mean, in a way, he has an essence, but he is super essential. He is beyond any fixed identity. That's also why I don't think he can be in a temporal process of any kind, because anything that's within time is subject to the essence of time and is inferior to essence rather than superior to essence.
Well, if I argued, remember I sent you my argument for what God is. I said God is everything, every single thing, and whatever the case. And God is existence itself. Like it's the most fundamental, right? When I was speaking to my friend Andrew about God and life, I said, being is fundamental. Logic comes after that. And he's like, well, being must be logical, though. I'm like, why? Because it describes being, he says. But there could be something that is illogical that exists. And maybe that's not the case. I don't know. But I always play around with these notions. Again, I'm not versed in philosophy like you and him, for example. But I'm like, what if I showed you an impossible object and it exists here, right here? You go, that's not possible. But here it is. What are you going to do about it? Like a strange loop. Have you ever heard of strange loop? There's a strange loop that goes up and down and it sounds infinite. And it's the piano keys or some kind of symphonies it just keeps on going higher and lower. And your mind's like, what's that? Or that one triangle that's like this, but it actually, you know what I'm talking about? That shouldn't be. Well, how is that possible?
Well, because they're illusions. They're
right,
auditory or optical illusions.
Right. So these illusions shouldn't be possible, but they're happening. Just like you see an oasis in the desert. That's not supposed to be there. It's not possible. There's no water, but yet it's there. So again, if this whole thing is a dream, it would kind of make sense that all these illusions are possible and whatever the case.
Yeah.
But as in regards to intelligence, like I believe, and I wrote in my book that whatever the seed that grows the tree, right, has all the potential of that tree in there. So if there's intelligence in us, then this thing must have intelligence. But then I go back to this. If that intelligence, what if it's a subconscious intelligence? That this Godhead is a subconscious intelligence, as Bernardo Kastrup had said, pure absolute subjectivity. There's no I am, there's no this, it's just the field of pure subjective consciousness. And then it does like my subconscious mind is pumping my blood. It's doing whatever it does, all the cell. I have no control. I could stop my heart if I want. If I could hold my breath consciously, I could do other things. But most of my bodily functions are just going. And Alan Watts used to always say, you're moving the sun, but you don't remember how to do it. Now I don't think he's literally meaning it, but he looks at everything as one organism. The universe is us. It's doing me and you. You and I are coming out of the universe because the universe is us. And we don't know how to move the sun, just like you don't know how to move your heart. We don't know how to digest our food, just like you don't know how to move the river. Right. And I don't know if he means that literally, but I get what he's trying to say. So there is an intelligence clearly, because I don't think there could be no intelligence and then all of a sudden there's intelligence. I don't buy that. I know physicalists say, well, yeah, sure, in certain patterns, and there could be intelligence but there's got to be some form of intelligence to start with. It could be like a baby. And I wrote that in my book. I said maybe the consciousness of God is like a child, and it like makes stuff and it doesn't know what it's doing, and it's not perfect, but it is perfect because it's the only that's making stuff, and that we're more complex than it, right? In a sense, but we don't know how to make a universe. I don't know if the creation was directed, is what I'm saying, or rather it's its natural cause of its nature. You know what I mean? But are you not asking me why does it have these natural characteristics to begin with? Are you not asking me?
Yeah, I was just going to illustrate that same point from another angle. So if you're saying that God is seminally intelligent, he contains the seeds of possible intelligence, the structure of that possibility is already as complex as the structure of actual intelligence.
Yeah, like the seed has the blueprints of the tree, is what you're saying.
Yeah, but it's as complex already, just in potential rather than in actuality. So everything you have to account for in the actualized intelligence is already there in the potential form. Every detail is already there. Every possible truth is already there as a possible truth before the experiment is run. That's why I don't think you can think of it properly as like a creative process where genuinely new stuff comes about. I do think like it's been running forever. The intelligence has been fully discovered and in fact is presupposed by the whole thing from the start. Again, I'm going to use that point that like if we're going through this process, the forms are structuring how this process is possible. The forms are always presupposed. They're eternal entities. Those eternal entities are the contents of mind. As to the question of, is the absolute conscious or unconscious? I mean, what is consciousness? I personally think of consciousness as oneness, right? Like mind has various contents. We can look at the different aspects of mind, different mental operations. And so it's like any given thing in your mind is not consciousness. Consciousness is what stands behind all the individual things. It's what joins all the individual things. The oneness that joins the multiplicity of mind, that's what makes us conscious. Like it's just sort of I don't know, it's like topologically a weird thing. Like the structure, the geometrical structure of consciousness, when you think about it, it's like, where is your consciousness? Is it right behind your eyes? Well, like I see the door to this room. That door is in my consciousness as well as what's behind my eyes. Like all the different spatial points are equally like imminent to conscious awareness. If you've had like psychedelic experiences like you're talking about, like this phenomenon will be more clear that consciousness permeates like the farthest things from the locus of physical identity. It permeates things that are near. It's like fundamentally one. Consciousness can't be simple because it's what joins complex things together. So I would say, in that sense, like God is conscious because God is that oneness of things that joins all the contents of mind, and so it has to be prior to mind because it allows for the existence of mental things. But also, it contains the seeds of mind, and all of those eternal possible mental structures are there from eternity, and that would be, again, the intellective God. Because if all of those forms are there potentially seminally, okay, where are they contained? They're contained in that aspect of the deity, the intellective God, the demiurge in a Platonic language. And then the process is subordinate to that.
Well, like the seed, let's go back to the seed. It contains the blueprint for the tree. It actually is the tree in a different form. And I don't know if it's superior to the tree or inferior to the tree. That's like a perspective, right? Like this is this little tiny seed. It can't do much, but it has the potential to become a tree, and it does become a tree. In fact, the tree and the seed are the same thing at different points in time. So I'm just trying to figure out whether or not, if this Godhead that you're speaking of, like it seems to me, it has a mind that contains all the forms, the Platonic forms that you speak of, like the chairness, triangularness, the man, like we'll get into like what is the perfect man, right? I think you think that's Christ,
Mhm.
this Platonic form of Christ or the goodness. So it seems to me this thing has, I mean, is it conscious of these forms or is it just like I said, in the back of my head right now, I have desires driving my behavior. I don't know of them. So does this Godhead of yours know of them? Know what a triangle is? Like, because to me, if I knew everything, I would go crazy. It's almost the beautiful thing is being ignorant and learning new things.
It
So
would know. It wouldn't know all extended illusory reality. It would only know the eternal truths, and those would all harmonize together in this kind of beautiful symphony of form, and that could be an eternal experience. But outside of time, of course, it's not like it's a self-reflective. Like here's God, the agent, observing his you know collection of various forms. Like it's that is his essence at the same time. All of these forms together in a unity, harmonized. That is a kind of omniscience in that that demiurge mind would know everything truly real, in that it's everything that is eternally the case. As we go down to more particular experiences, there are things that are true only in the context of my perception right now, like the auditory illusion of the eternally ascending scale. Like that experience of that illusion is true for me at my level of interpretation, but it's not like the mathematical truth of what's happening. A
right.
given interval, like a perfect fifth, has a kind of Platonic form that is genuine and real, and that would exist eternally in the mathematicals. Just to give this kind of point of trivia, like the forms are different from the mathematicals. So people talk about the form triangularity. The perfect triangle exists at the level of soul. The mathematicals in Platonism are at the level of soul. That's the same kind of thing that we are. That's it involves a kind of separation, a cognitive separation of process, whereas the forms are more unified than souls are. But souls are also eternal. Mathematicals are eternal. So the world soul would measure all the genuine mathematical operations, all the kind of true virtues of the soul, and know like be omniscient in the sense that the world soul would know everything that is good and real about soul. But we know extra stuff in that we also have the illusion. So you say, like, you don't want God to know absolutely everything because then he knows the experience of being tortured and all this other unpleasant
Well, he
stuff.
would have to know. I mean, that's
Yeah,
what I was arguing. Like he came
right.
into this world to know that, if you will, or in
It,
many forms. Like when I
yes,
watch a cartel video, I'm like, man, that's a bad choice. He made that's a bad way to go. But maybe he
right.
has to experience that to know what it's like. In order to be omniscient, he must not just know that person's being tortured. He must be the person being. He can't just be know it viscerally. Like, oh, that really, I know what it's like to be tortured. Like I don't know what it's like to give birth.
Right.
I could be like, well, does it hurt your stomach? Yeah, it hurts my stomach. Okay, honey, what else? Oh, it hurts this. Kind of get it. I've been punched, but I don't know. I have to actually go through birth to go, yeah, I know exactly what it's like to give birth. And then my way of giving birth might be different from her way of giving birth. That was a 24-hour labor. Mine was 15. So it's like, in order for God to know everything in this real and this way, he'd have to actually be everyone.
He would have to profane himself to have that kind of omniscience. So I think it's a different, like, the one as pure consciousness doesn't even have like mental contents. He has super intelligible contents, and the plural there is not quite right. The demiurge, the intellective god, has all of those forms together in unity. It has omniscience in the sense that he knows all that is truly real at that eternal level. Soul, the perfect soul, has all of the operations of mind joined together in one act of measurement. Souls measure time in Platonism, so that's where time comes into being, where we measure it. And the world soul is that soul that measures eternity. So we measure like limited spans of time. The perfect soul takes in one cognitive act, a temporalizing act, all good, virtuous, true acts of soul. And then the lower souls have to exist in order that they can not defile the omniscience of the world soul, not defile that like ideal, like divine state. They can separate themselves from that state, leave that unchanged, and get all of the novelty, and then get the lessons that are true lessons from those experiences, go through reincarnation, forget and lose the evils. The evils wash away with time, and all that's left are the goods that otherwise God wouldn't have. Because if all of the lower stuff didn't exist, and it was just like God, the perfect mathematician, doing all the math in his mind forever, then all of those details about, you know, not just like the horrors of war, but the virtues that you discover, that you cultivate in war, and a part of yourself, a lesson that you learn in that context, like God wouldn't have that. But he does have that because we ascend back to him and we retain the lessons that we have. And so it's like as well grounded as God experiencing it himself, because all the genuine stuff we kept with us, we forgot the illusion, we forgot the evil. And evil isn't like a real thing. It is fundamentally always predatory. It's always an absence. It's something that is lost in the cycle of reincarnation. We lose particular evils, we retain the lessons, we retain the virtues, and we bring those back and into the blessed condition of the divine mind.
And so, in a way, that in order for those divine light to exist, there must be this darkness. In order for that perfect triangle to be in that Platonic form, there must be examples of imperfect triangles. It's the kind of way I'm
Yeah,
trying to see it, because
yeah, yeah.
it's like I think the yin yang is the most accurate description of what I think this reality is. It's one thing, but it has two sides to it, two forces to it. I think, and perhaps God does too. Perhaps God has both, again, conscious and subconscious mind. And I'm just trying to. My struggle is whether or not this, because I was a Catholic for 23 years, so I was a Catholic, and experiencing the war and learning about the world around me, I was like, maybe this isn't true. And I'd ask questions to my dad like this: Dad, if I died after getting X amount of communions and you got more, am I going to hell? Because why do we keep coming to church every Sunday? How many communions do I need? I was like, in order to be saved. And these are just, little questions that I'd ask as a kid. He's like, you have to go to church every Sunday and you have to be on time. Like, but what if I die and I don't, do I die? Things like this, stupid questions that were like, started my questioning of God. And then when I was in Iraq and I'm like, I'm praying to God and those guys are too, but they blew up. So what's up with that? Is praying useless? If God has a master plan, why do I pray at all? Because why would my prayers alter that plan that's already set? And if he has no plan, why is he not listening to me? Or why does he pick that guy, me over that guy, or whatever the case? So I had all these questions. And then eventually I became like a deist, if you will. I read Thomas Paine's Age of Reason. And it's like, look, all these things in the Bible are prophecies. They're singing and they're dancing and songs, and they don't prove anything. And the only thing that isn't man-made is nature. I go, that's a good freaking point. I didn't create those mountains, and no one wrote them into existence. So there must be a God. And the problem of evil is solved when God doesn't because God doesn't intervene. So I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm like, okay. And then I was like, you know what? Is there even a need for a God? If the universe is eternal and it just has all these forms, it's just the way it is, then what's the point of a God? Then I'm like, well, I don't know, something's missing, right? Because then you have these transcendentals and all these emotions, and science can't explain everything. I'm like, maybe there's an intelligence of some sort. And so I go back to this, I run into Sadhguru, I run into, Alan Watts and things like this. And then I run into Bernardo Castro, which I think is probably the best explanation so far. And have you ever heard of Rupert Spira? He's like
I have.
he's a non-dualist.
Yeah.
So I don't even know if that's any different than I think they just keep renaming the same thing, because him and Bernardo Castro had a conversation, and they basically, because Rupert Spira tries to do this, imagine a whirlpool or imagine a lake and all these little whirlpools start forming. We're all the whirlpools, and eventually we go out and we go back to the lake, right? Something like this. And Bernardo's the same thing with his altars, right? We're all different altars. We can't read each other's minds, and if we go to certain states of mind, we become more porous, and we can have access to the mind at large. And that kind of makes sense to me too. And the best explanation, I think, is that you think of a dream, and in your dream, all the things in your head are physical. While you're like, you stump your toe in the dream, you fall off a mountain, you get hurt, you get punched, you feel everything. It feels physical, but all of it's mental. And I'm like, you just take that idea and imagine this world being that, and you're inside of God's dream. Like, that makes a lot of damn sense. And I can't communicate with God mentally, and he doesn't know my thoughts, or I don't know his thoughts exactly, or he doesn't even know mine because we're disassociated. But we're all coming from that one source. And to me, this solves the mind-body problem, because if everything's mental, then the consciousness, the mind-body problem is solved. Whereas if everything's physical, it doesn't make any sense that a physical substance has mental experience, the qualia, what's redness, so on and so forth. So, I mean, that's where I'm at right now with this Bernardo Kastrup idea. I don't think he believes the mind at large is conscious of itself. I don't know what to believe. But I'm coming back to, and I've been talking to Orthodox Christians. I ran into you, because if there is this mind at large, right, and it is conscious of itself, why wouldn't it come down and reveal itself?
Yeah.
And this is kind of like a computer developer, right? He makes a video game, and he goes, you know what? I'm going to jump in. Here's my avatar. And by the way, I have all the cheat codes. I could fly, I could teleport, I could, one of those guys. Why not? And I don't know if this happened. I don't know if Christ came down. There's a many different Christ stories. There's like 14 different versions of a, God man, and got crucified, Osiris, or whatever the case. Mm-hmm. So I don't know which one's true or not. But if you accept God to be omnipotent, omnipresent, all loving, then why would it not come down or not instruct its people? Right. But what if the statement "and God became man" also actually means God became us? Rather than one man, he became all of us, and we're all God. So there's many ways to look at it.
Jesus tells us that we can do the things that he does. Like, he says that we can do all of these miracles. He says the kingdom of heaven is within. I think it's easy to interpret Jesus' statements in a non-dual way. He does, in a way, sound like a guru.
People think because he disappeared apparently for a couple of years, that he went east and learned from the Eastern philosophers and came back. And there's kind of a pantheism in Christianity of some sorts.
I mean, he wouldn't even need to go east. This stuff is all in Platonism. And surely Jesus knew Plato. I mean, I'm sure, spoke Greek. He was also Plato's creator, so you would expect him to know Plato. But yeah, I mean, in Platonism, it's not just the one avatar either. It's, we have to think about what are the various levels of intelligence beyond human beings, and how would they interface with us. In Platonism, there are various levels of spiritual entities. There's your personal daimon, tutelary spirit, similar to a guardian angel. This whole spectrum from the absolute most perfect mind, greatest mind possible, to where we are. It has to be filled out somehow or other. And if these minds are greater than us in moral quality as well as intellectual powers, then they will want to providentially attend things here. And so, yeah, I mean, that was a weird perspective shift in my philosophical development, going from more of an Advaita Vedanta, focusing on the oneness and accepting avatars, and then realizing no, maybe the world is more populated by intelligences than I understand. And now with the UFO stuff, I don't know what's going on with some of that. But
yeah, I don't know if those are psyops to cover up government technology. I used to be scared as hell of aliens, man. When I was a kid, those gray aliens would oh, they're coming to my window. I used to be scared as shit, man, those aliens. Because they come in there and they're you're paralyzed, and then they probe you, and I don't want that. But then they could be demons. I mean, apparently this happened centuries ago. And but because I remember I spoke to Keith about talking to you, and he said, you're a perennialist, right? You believe that every religion has some truth in it, in a sense, right?
Yeah.
And I think you're right. And because you could see, because look, if it's true that God wrote a morality in our hearts, and reason, and we were bestowed upon with reason, then you would find reason and logic and wisdom in everything. And I do. I could, even Judaism, I've learned some things from them, even though I disagree with the religion completely. Hinduism, I've learned things. I've heard from a lot of, even atheists make good points. But I think that, in my view, I don't even know. Do you comprehend my view at all? Does it make any sense to you, like where I'm coming from? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I was in a similar position.
what do you describe my view as? I would say it's a pantheist, panentheist kind of thing. Like a, I don't
Well,
even freaking know. I let go of trying to grasp. Is what I'm trying to say to you,
mhm.
Arvel, is that I've kind of like said, you know what? I don't exactly know, and that's fine. And I'm just going to live my life according to the flow. And ever since I've submitted to this so-called flow, my life has improved dramatically. And I don't even know what the hell it is. And I don't know if I'll ever know what it is. But what do you think, what I've told you so far? What do you get from my view?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what you're committed to because I haven't read your book, and you've like contemplated some different possibilities here. But I would say you lean more towards pantheism than panentheism.
Yeah.
Panentheism would be God subsumes the
Yes.
world. It's all like God's substance here, but then is also transcendent of space time as well. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I'm a panentheist. I think Orthodox Christians could be classified as panentheists as well. Um,
And
but
I'm
yeah, this
open
has
to
been
that.
a
I'm open to that because, if this thing is intelligent, that's the only question I have. Is this thing aware of itself? Does it have a plan? I mean, I think it would be so torturous to know everything. I think it's like, imagine you sit down to watch a movie, you already know it. It's like, what's the point? What's the point of doing anything? You'd want to forget it. You'd want to enjoy experiences like this. So I even wonder if omniscience is possible. Sometimes I ask myself, but I'm open to anything, man. Like I said, I'm
yeah.
always willing to learn from different peoples, and um, so
I
so
think
you yeah.
the one question is just like, what's the limit on mind? How far does this go? And what's at the top? I mean, that's just
Well, think of our minds. I mean, I could sit here and imagine anything I want. And based on the physics that I know and the shapes that I know and colors, and I could just sit here. I could imagine a whole world. Like right now, I'm imagining a Tyrannosaurus came out of nowhere. I didn't move anywhere. It just. So that's where that moving. Remember, I said the moving problem with God's moving. Maybe it doesn't have to
mhm,
move because I'm sitting here and I'm thinking of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. He's yellow. I turned him red, and I'm doing all this without moving anywhere. It's just happening in my imagination. So if this is my power, imagine the ultimate mind. It just does this. It actually makes a
right,
Tyrannosaurus Rex. It actually makes you and me. And it doesn't have to move because what is movement? I don't know. Like I said,
right,
movement is a measurement from one space to another.
yeah.
Now,
Thoughts in
and
the mind of God,
yeah, so I guess that's where I'm at. But I do want to explore. I mean, I don't know how long you want. I can go on forever. It's up to you. But I do want to explore, why did you become a Christian Platonist? What does that even mean? Is that, do you take it
right?
literally? That, I mean, I watched that one video that you did with that one guy, and I got kind of the gist of it. But why not like Islamic Platonism or some other thing? Why Christian Platonism?
Well, the Islamic holy texts, the moral code. I mean, they advocate lying in certain circumstances. It's just it doesn't kind of bear the signature of like a divinely inspired uh, faith. I think Sufism, obviously, they are very non-literal in their interpretation of the Quran. And I haven't read the whole Quran, but I've read a good amount, and it just looks like Arab barbarism and manipulation, to be honest. Um, Hinduism, I've read their sacred texts, and I, have that feeling that this is divinely inspired. This is like an aesthetically beautiful moral system, and like a intellectually satisfying system of explanation of the world. But I became a Platonist because I do think that Plato was an advance on Advaita Vedanta, because what the Hindus never explained was the transcendentals, was the forms. Um, I mean, they did work in mathematics, but they didn't build in an explanation for what math is and how it functions. And math was very important for Plato, and he started the Western system of education. I mean, arguably Pythagoras did, but Plato's Academy was the first institution of higher learning in the West, and we discovered everything. So it's like you know a tree by its fruits, and the fruits of Platonic philosophy is basically all of science. Like it starts there with Plato. It was because of his philosophy of math and because of the philosophy of the forms, which again bridges that gap between like the absolute and our particularistic experience. I think the more layers we have on that ladder, the easier the ascent. That's also a reason why we should accept these intermediary spiritual entities and interfacing with them, because they're closer to our nature, so we can relate to them, and they're closer to God's nature than we are, and so they can subtly kind of pull us up. And as far as the why the Christian thing, it's because there's no other candidate since Jesus for a genuine avatar that I'm convinced by in any way. There are claims of avatars of God in the last 2,000 years, but I just haven't been convinced by any of them. There's Ramakrishna in the 1800s, a Hindu figure that modern Advaita Vedantists, especially affiliated with the Vedanta Society, would uphold as an avatar, but he didn't, display any miraculous powers. He had throat cancer, so uh, there were incidents in his life where he would like demonstrate very like gluttonous behavior and
Mhm.
then go back to like he was just like all over the place. So
A lot of these godmen are that they're like rapists or something.
yeah,
Like, there's always something
right, right,
wrong.
right.
Or like Osho was like a materialist or something.
Mm-hmm.
He's a funny guy, Osho. But well, what about Buddha though? Buddha pretty much seemed like he was a prince, I think, right? He was
Right.
royalty or something.
Well, he wasn't the difference between a Buddha and an avatar is a Buddha is an ascent to that state of consciousness. An avatar is a descent, a voluntary descent.
Oh yeah, okay,
The
yeah, yeah.
Buddha was born
Cuban
with
goes up. Yeah,
karma
yeah, right.
and he overcame it through his own efforts. But as far as I understand, like originary Buddhism, it's really not different from Advaita Vedanta. There's no like doctrine in Buddhism that is an improvement on the Upanishadic philosophy, and so I don't like I. There's this idea in Platonism that when an idea inserts itself into the world, the first instance of it is going to be the most powerful and kind of the most true, and the history of Platonism kind of looks that way. But like the first person to innovate in some field is often like the greatest mind, and then
Mhm.
everything off of that is like echoes. So I
It's
look
like
for
a
that
copy.
signature.
Yeah, it's like a copier. When you copy the original doc, it gets worse and worse. It like
Right,
loses information.
right, and that's also the Platonic view of like reality as a whole. Everything is emanations, reflections from the one true being, and then we're down here in shadows of shadows
Mhm.
kind of territory.
And that's why we suffer and we're not perfect and so
Right.
on.
Right. Um, but yeah, so Jesus is just the best candidate for an avatar. He also has an original moral teaching that makes sense karmically, and the Hindus don't recognize it. They don't accept reciprocal forgiveness, where if I forgive others, my karma can be forgiven. There's no concept like that. They have different ways you can burn away your karma through your effort. And they do believe that, for instance, like devotional worship to Rama or Krishna does like resolve some of your karmic debt. But the Christians with reciprocal forgiveness, that's like sociologically, obviously, hugely powerful. Um, you can point to like previous states in Europe, Northern Europe, of a high degree of civilization before the age of Christianity. But when Christianity encountered the Irish, when it encountered the Germans, they were very warlike and not all that sophisticated. It did civilize peoples. It stopped cycles of retributive bloodshed. It's just again demonstrated through the fruits. Pretty hard to argue with.
What
Um,
do you think of the people like, for example, my friend, Adam Green?
yeah, I haven't seen a lot of his stuff.
Well, he believes that, for example, Christianity is a Jewish psyop to destroy Rome. So essentially, they got the Romans to abandon their gods and to have this Christ figure that is a savior. That's turn the other cheek. The meek will inherit the earth, weaken the empire, which was already collapsing anyway, and eventually get all the Gentiles to worship Yahweh, the God of the Jews, so that they could eventually take the whole world as everything is a Noahide. And that means Jesus was Jewish and all that. And then there are people who say Jesus wasn't Jewish. He was a Nazarene. He was an Arian. He was.
Right.
There's so many different controversies. I argue that whatever he was, if he was God, it doesn't matter if he came down as a black man, a goat. It doesn't really matter, right? But what's your take on Christ as a? Do you think he actually existed as a real person? Was he God in the flesh,
Yeah.
or is he just a story of a person? Because people say there's not much evidence that he existed. Like Adam will bring up, there's only like 4 sources. Josephus, who was Jewish, Titus mentioned it or something, and there's like you would think there's paintings everywhere, diary entries. I met a guy named Jesus. He walked on water. A lot of people say that the story of Christ didn't get written into like 70 years after the fact or 30 years or something. And you look at the Bible as crucifixion, there's 4 different accounts, the earthquakes, people came from the dead. So that would mean Lazarus wasn't a miracle. I'm just looking at it like that. Like, I don't know if the Bible's true at all. Rather, it's just allegories and to be taken literally.
If you apply the same standards for other historical figures from that time period, there's as much or more evidence for Jesus, than for a figure like Socrates.
Well,
Like
yeah,
we
no,
have
like Lao
Platonic
Tzu. Nobody
dialogues.
knows if
Yeah,
Lao Tzu even existed,
right.
but
Like there's
because
more evidence, I think, for Jesus than for Mohammed as a historical figure. Um, so I think it's just special pleading when people argue that about Jesus. The way I think of it is these were claims, historical claims that could have been invalidated during the era that we do have writings. I think pretty convincingly we do have writings from the second half of the first century. And during that time, there were people still living who experienced all of the events of the early first century. And so, if it would have been easy to disprove the claims. The fact that they weren't questioned, that they were accepted as historical claims by the Christian community, and the people who were around at that time living where Jesus was didn't say, like, hey, all that is wrong, as far as we know. That lends credence to the historical validity. And also just the rapid spread of Christianity. Like, if the resurrection didn't happen, why was Christianity able to spread so quickly?
well, I
Um,
think what happened was, I think the people agree that there was no body in the tomb, right? So the Jews say it was stolen. The Christians say it risen from the dead. But what I understand, the Romans had a choice between Mithraism and Christianity, and the Christians were willing to die for their beliefs. Like they were literally kill them, crucify, throw them the line. They would
yeah.
not recant, and that inspired that to spread. I mean, you got to have religious systems. Like if I said our
But there,
religious,
why was their belief so strong?
I don't know. That's
Yeah,
why it's catchy. Like it's like if you said, "Bro, I saw aliens," I'm like, "Look, I'm gonna put a gun to your head and pull this trigger." You're like, "No, go ahead, bro. I'm not changing my story. I saw those aliens. Maybe he did see those aliens, But I think Constantine, his politician, I don't know if he was a true believer or not. Was like, look, either we take Mithraism or we take this other thing where people are willing to die for. We could unite the Christian peoples and also Rome. And you see the pagan, Christmas tree has nothing to do with a guy in the desert, right? The Easter bunny is a fertility goddess, right? The eggs. And so the Romans made Roman Catholicism pretty much as like St. Nicholas and Santa Claus. It's just Wotan with the reindeer. I'm not saying that. I don't know if Jesus Christ was born on the 25th of December either, but
probably not.
right. So I'm saying a lot of this stuff has been paganized to spare the lives of the empire. You don't want to slaughter everyone, right?
Well, it's a telephone game, you know.
Yeah,
I also
that
think
too.
the Jewish psyop thing, like, I think Christianity, some branches of Christianity were a Jewish psyop.
Well,
Of
like
course,
Christian
Jews would have,
Zionism, yes, of
yeah,
course.
in recent centuries, but also probably in the first centuries as well. Like, the Jews wouldn't just let this go unchecked; they would try to get control of it.
That's
I
what I
don't know
tell Adam. I say
exactly.
there's a lot. He's like, well, it's working now. I'm like, yeah, there are some sects like Protestantism, which is strange because Martin Luther wrote a very nasty book about those people. But Christian Zionism is a huge problem. Without Christian Zionism, APAC would have virtually no power. But without getting into these issues, because I don't want you to nuke your channel, uh, there are people who are Orthodox Christians. They reject those doctrines. The old Catholics reject, like the traditional Catholics. They say that Jews are guilty of deicide to this day. But then you had that in 1967 or five was the Vatican II, where they forgave the Jews of deicide and they opened up anyone could be saved from any religion. And it's not just Catholic, something like this. I don't remember exactly. but it was corrupted. And my father said to me, the church is going to be corrupted. He's like, Satan's going to go where the good people are, right? He doesn't have to corrupt the murderer. He has to corrupt you. So I'm like, Dad, why is the church full of pedophiles? Why is this nonsense? What's going on here? But going back to my point was, if it were a psyop, let's say, it clearly is still absorbed by our people's biospirit, if you will, right? Our essence. Like, people say to me, well, why do you care if Europe becomes Muslim? I'm not even a Christian, right? And I say, because that's not our people's soul. It's like, I cannot see Europe being full of, mosques and all the people starting wearing Muslim dress. And I just don't see Europeans do, although there are Bosnians and other white people who have, I don't see it. And it's like, it would be weird as if the Chinese or European became Asian and we start having those different structures from Asia. And it just wouldn't make sense. I think each people's kind of, even if this was a Jewish fairy tale, right? Let's say, or Jesus was a story from a Jewish community, we Aryanized it. When I grew up, my father had a painting of Jesus. He had blonde, he was blue eyes, he had light hair, he looked like a white guy to me. And then you have this recreation by like Israelis, like, no, he actually looked like this ugly monster.
Mhm.
It's like, and then in China, Jesus is Asian and so on. So I don't know what to say about the Jesus Christ thing being true or not. I mean, is it possible? Again, if God exists, Arvel, then anything's possible. Obviously, forget it. There's no argument. If you accept the premise there's a God, he's all loving, he wants to intervene, why would he not come down and give us an example? But then the argument's like, why did he have to kill himself to forgive us of his own wrath, right? What was the point of him coming down? And Carl Jung said, actually, Christ came down to forgive God for his sins. And that's kind of like blasphemy, right? I was watching this video, like, well, what if Christ came down to forgive God of his sins for being kind of like, not careless, but like cold with his creations, all that suffering before Christ came, all
Being a
that.
dick to Job.
Right, exactly. Things like this. Like, why did he make a deal with Satan? What did he make a deal to teach Satan a lesson? Because he knew he would lose, right? Or why did he say to Abraham, kill your son? Was it to teach Abraham that he would kill his son and go, I almost killed my son for you, God, because God knew he wouldn't do it, right? You could argue this. I don't know if any of these stories are true. I tend to think that the Bible should not be taken literally. And just because it's not factual doesn't mean it wasn't inspired divinely. For example, I always bring this up when I talk about religion. I remember, and Peter Parker's uncle said, Peter, with great power comes great responsibility. That's wisdom. And that's from Spider-Man. Okay. So just because something's not true or not a real story doesn't mean there's no human wisdom and knowledge in it. So all the Bible stories of Job, that doesn't mean it actually happened, but it shows someone so devoted to God, he would go through all this trouble to be devoted and at the end get more out of it. Or Jonah and the whale. I mean, we all know you cannot be swallowed by a whale and live for 3 days. So what was the point of that story? I don't even know exactly what happened in that story, but these other things, like maybe they're not true, but they're inspired to give you morality. Because what is the point of the Bible, right? Is to give you the morality to end up in heaven, from what I understand, right? That's the point of it. So do these things actually have to happen? Some people say they happened exactly the way they're written. The earth is 5,000 years old. The earth is flat. The dinosaurs died like 10 years ago. There's people who take it literally. Then there are people who take it figuratively. Like, well, no, actually, this just means to like love thy neighbor. This was what happened. Lazarus didn't really, so on and so on. And I tend to believe it's like that because, like the Quran said, that Muhammad flew up to the moon and split it in half. Well, clearly that didn't happen because there would have been a catastrophe. The moon would be split in half. So what's up with that story? So I don't know if the Bible has any veracity at all. But the point is, if it's to make moral story, if it's give you moral teachings to goat herders, because that's what these people were. You kind of make up these, like Dr. Seuss or Spider-Man, right? What do you think of that?
Yeah, my interpretation of the Bible is kind of from the perspective of comparative mythology. I don't think the Bible is the only sacred scripture. I don't think it's all literally true, but I think all of it is divinely inspired, although it's mixed, where events are described sometimes in the Old Testament without necessarily being explicitly affirmed. So I think that, the Hebrews had a kind of dual influence. The Gnostics, some sects of Gnostics, believed that the Jewish God was Satan, and Jesus came. Jesus
They
came
burned those
to
people up too.
represent like the true God and correct. Right. Uh, but I think both influences were there. It makes sense that some people would fill the role that the Jews are filling now, where I don't think I'm saying anything like too taboo if I say like they hold power at a global level. They're the most powerful group in the world in objective terms, financially,
Mm.
influence, etc. Someone was going to do that. Some group would do that. And like group evolutionary strategy, like they were going to act kind of how the Jews act. Like that's like the dominant strategy in terms of like money, power, and the way that they operate. So I think providentially, if God wanted to turn that whole process of like allow the descent in order to get the ascent and the recollection, you influence, you steer that group that was going to take that role at a global level. You allow for salvation, you allow like moral teachings so that when you then incarnate in that group to like be this inflection point in history in like the most relevant group to influence in a way to impact like the future of civilization, then Jesus had like the Psalms, which I think are primarily just divinely inspired good stuff. Like I don't know anyone who like doesn't like the content of the Psalms, or the Book of Wisdom, and there's a lot of good stuff in the Old Testament, and also a lot of very like shady, like okay, so you promised these people you were going to ally with them, and then asked them to like circumcise so they could become Jews, and then you slaughtered everyone, like man, woman, child. You were told to go like literally genocide these people. There's all of this like really objectionable stuff that looks like the Hebrews had some kind of pact with an evil spirit,
Mm-hmm.
like the Gnostics were right. But then there's also this like divinely inspired literature and stories that do have moral messages. And so I think it is kind of a mixed bag. And Jesus himself said we have to, be good money changers and tell the genuine from the counterfeit. Um, so like existentially, that's our predicament is like looking at all these scriptures. I think the world spiritual legacy, like that's our position. Like we just have to kind of sift it all out. But as far as like the historical relevance, it makes sense that God would incarnate in that people specifically. He would prepare for the incarnation, and then what's described in the Book of Revelation, I think it looks like it's going to happen. I think that's what we're headed for. Global government, beast system is AI. I wrote a piece for Arctos, relatively short essay on that, like from a Platonic kind of lens, reading Revelation. So I take a lot of it very seriously. I expect like biblical prophecy to be fulfilled. Whether because there are like Christian Zionists funding the construction of the third temple kind of thing taking place, as well as like Jewish groups that want to do this stuff as well. I think that's the timeline we're in. World history is dominated by this story, and the Jews and Jesus Christ are at the center of it, for better or worse.
So, what do you think of the times where, like, the Nicene Council, where they just determined what is the Word of God or not, and they got rid of like the Bible of Thomas or something, and like that's the
Yeah,
the,
yeah,
the problem that I would have with religion is we don't know what the Word of God is because mankind decided that's out. Like, no, we don't like that version. That comic was going out the window. Like, how do we know that wasn't the truth? Or that's my concern is that
right.
is written by many people over hundreds of years and different languages and like telephone, by the time you get it, it's a whole different story.
Mm-hmm.
And so how can that be? First of all, there are people who say it's inerrant. There's not a single mistake, which I mean, we could see with evolution, or we could see with the Earth's shape. We could see the people say this is all nonsense. They're hiding God. I mean, you don't have to hide God. I can't see him, But people make these excuses that no, well, younger creationism is true and NASA's fake and all that. And I don't argue with anyone. I don't care. They can believe what they want. I just find it hard to believe that there's going to be a massive conspiracy to cover up God, which we can't find anyway. Uh, in any with any empiricism whatsoever. So you don't have to tell me we didn't go to the moon to prove God exists or something, or the Earth is flat. But that's the problem with the Bible. To me, it's written by men who don't know much about the reality, and they did their best at their time. And there's no condemnation of slavery. There's no condemnation of the things we find today. In fact, Aaron Ra, you know who he is? One of these not new atheists, but he's a big. He's like, if you followed the Bible's laws you would be a criminal in every country on the planet. Like, and he's right. I mean, back then.
Yeah.
But then here comes Christ, and he like but he says we're not going to change one letter of the old law. So am I still supposed to execute people on the Sabbath or not? Am I still? And that's maybe where this Gnostic stuff, maybe these other people made a deal with the wrong kind of God, and perhaps it's Satan and Lucifer and whatever the case, and Christ came to fix that. And maybe he came as a Jew, because if he didn't, how would he be executed, right? He has to be rejected by these people who have this arrogance and chutzpah to do it. Because if he came as a Gentile, I think the Gentiles would be like, oh, cool. Hey, this is pretty cool. Maybe he had to, or maybe he tried to save these people from their own destruction and they killed them anyway. Either way, he had to go. I mean, his death, it was part of the plan, right? He wasn't going to come live among us forever. He had to die. The question is, was he God? And I don't know if he ever said he was, right? I think one of the Muslim arguments is there's not a single sentence where Christ said, I am God. Isn't that true, though? Like, he never said, I am God.
I and the Father are one.
But couldn't that mean like me and my Father or what? Like, isn't that's like the biggest argument against Christianity, is that he never said, I am God. He said, I and the Father are one, but that could be interpreted as like we're the same, like love, like me and my wife are one. You see what I'm saying? Like when me and my wife get married, we become one. Does that literally mean we're the same person?
Yeah. He also says, I am the truth. I mean, I
But
would have to.
but I saw
Yeah.
I saw a clip today where a Muslim said, he's like, well, God, he goes, he asked the Christian, he goes, well, Jesus is supposed to come back, and the Christian goes, yeah, to judge. He goes, yeah, that's fine. He's a prophet, but only God can judge. And the Muslim goes, he just freezes, right? Because the Muslim believe Jesus coming back to judge, but he reminds him like only God can judge. So that means Christ is God, right?
At a
So they're
certain
kind of,
level, it's kind of a moot point if you take this kind of monist philosophy that we were talking about before. If the teachings of Jesus were more of this like guru style, like returning people to their true self idea,
mhm.
well then, like, in a way all of us are incarnations of God
Right. That's what I'm.
anyway.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
just
Right.
like,
Right.
yeah, but there is a distinction between a soul that voluntarily descends and one that has karmic ties that force it to enter this world.
Now, when you say karmic ties, you believe there's a system of karma that has to be repaid? Because I thought when I listened to Sadhguru, he says karma just meant action. And so all the actions you take in your life are going to have consequences. There's no
Yeah.
system in the sky where it's like, okay, Arvel has X amount of karma that he has to burn off with this many good actions, or tit for tat. Like, oh, you did this, you stole a lollipop. That's X amount of karma.
Mm-hmm.
What's your? Because that's what he said. Karma just means action, and if you live by the sword, you're going to die by the sword. I mean, you're eventually going to get stabbed by someone, or something's going to happen to you. It's not like it's building up, because look, we see a lot of bad guys get away with stuff, right? I mean, bad guys can win in this world, good guys could lose. It's not like this system's it's almost like everyone's fairly mistreated. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like everyone gets the shit
Well,
out of the stick in some way.
if there are these intermediate spirits attending things, then they would be the ones, just like Plato describes, when we die and we reincarnate, they would be the ones guiding that process. And we would have some degree of choice in that. So it wouldn't be a deterministic system per se. But yeah, if there are higher intelligences at work, they can administer a higher law, just like we have law and we try to enforce it. We are kind of vehicles of karma for each other. We do punish each other. And I think even like, chimpanzees, other species, like the instinct for justice is part of the order of nature. Um, does it operate at a physical level as well, beyond biological life? Maybe in a sense, like the Neoplatonists had the concept of fate, which is similar to the concept of karma, really. It's not like fate is everything is predestined. Fate is the coordination of events in space time is necessarily harmonious in accordance with the overall plan of the world soul, because the universe is a living being. And so, just like our organs communicate with each other and regulate
Mm.
each other and balance each other, so events in the cosmos do the same. But yeah, I mean, there would be that same instinct for justice in the higher beings that are attending affairs here, sort of behind the scenes. So that's how I think karma would operate.
So in other words, you picked not other words, but you chose Christian Platonism because you believe in the Platonic realm, and the only being that fulfilled the perfect man in the Platonic form would be Christ.
I also think Krishna was an avatar, but Jesus was the last one, and
Okay.
he's the one that's coming next. And I think the end times prophecy is real.
Okay. All right. So I don't know where to go. Like for me, I don't know what to believe in regards to, because like what's happening to me is I'm going closer to a more intelligent entity, like that may intervene, may not. Because I've in my life, since I've submitted to the flow, I've noticed synchronicities. Like when I need something, I think of it, and literally the next day someone emails me it. I'm like, what the fuck? And it's happening a lot more.
Mhm.
And you could say, well, yeah, how about the times that the opposite happens? You could say that, of course. But things have improved in my life. Things have been flowing easier. I'm not suffering as much at all.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm pretty content, and that's actually better than joy, if you ask me. Right? There's none of these high intensity feelings. There's no sadness as much, and just giving into whatever is going on and giving myself to a higher cause, which I think is one of the noblest causes, is fighting the supremacy that we're dealing with right now. And I'm giving myself completely to it. And I'm getting armed with the tools, and I'm making connections with, I mean, just even talking to you right now is a connection. And all these different people are coming to me and thanking me and giving me connections and talking about this and that and all this new information. And it's like, wow, I submitted to myself to this thing. And I don't know if it's communicated. Is this how it talks to me? Is this what it's giving me, like signs? And it's a beautiful thing, because
Yeah.
before I didn't see much of this stuff. Like here and there it would, but I believe that my purpose is to serve, right? And I think that is finally the final step. And this is from Kabbalistic too, because I spoke to these two Jewish people who are Kabbalists. They said the God is the power to bestow, and we are the will to receive. And the ultimate form, the ultimate task for us is to be willing to receive and give back. So we take what God gives us, but also give back. We want to give. We want to take from and give back. It's like a loop,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we take first, we take all the money, all the women, and then you start. Wait, I want to give back. Like you know, a lot of people that become famous and rich, they want to give their money away. They want to do more. Like you date all these women, they're like you just want to get married. You get sick of it. You know, you have all this money. I never had money, but you know, some people get there and get so. What do? I'm going to build a hospital or so, something like this. You want to give back. The final step in being human is learning how to give back and loving giving back and serving the community, right? And that's kind of like Jesus at the end, right? Or these other people that came down, and you got to love for the other person. Like, what's the best thing? To die for another person, right? Give your life for another. You don't have to really kill yourself, but I'm saying like to serve another person, because I remember when I was selfish, man, it was very empty. I felt like like the most selfish part of my life was when I was a womanizer, right? I still am. I'm still a man. I still lust, of course. I have a wife. She's beautiful, but I still look at that 23-year-old at the gym. She's not even wearing underwear. Oh my God. And I just go, that's, it's temptation. But like when I was younger and dating women and having all this sex and drugs, I was like a vampire. I was empty. No amount of women, no matter how beautiful, no matter how many a week, no matter how much fun I had, I was always empty. And now that I settled down, had a family, and I give to my children, I give to my wife and dog and my community, and I fight this fight, I feel full. And I have so much left to give. And I don't care who I'll help anyone. Doesn't matter who they are, as long as they're on the same page as me, you know? I just want to give to them so that they could improve. And that's, I think, the final step in life is getting to this point. I'm not saying I'm finished, of course. I'm just beginning. And all of a sudden, my life has improved.
Yeah.
And there's challenges, but it's improved. And I feel like that's the message. And my grandfather, going back to him, he was a philosopher, super Catholic. My uncle as well, who passed away, he just said, love people. That was his message. Just love and give. That's all he said, my Uncle Andrew. Love and give, love and give. My whole family, super Catholic, super religious, just love and live, love and give, love and give. That's the opposite of take and hate, take and hate, take and hate, which these other groups do. And I mean, this is much, and I think it was, whose mother was it? I don't know which, I think it was Mike Tyson's mom, someone's mother, some famous guy's mom said, it's easy to love those that love you, but it's harder to love those that hate. That's the real goal, is to love those who hate you. That doesn't mean embrace a murderer and rapist. It means like, okay, you understand they're going through something. Not like, I've learned to hate my enemy without emotion. What I mean by this, Arvel, is this. That's my opponent at the other side of the chess table. That's it. It's not personal. Got to play the game. I don't have to hate them at all. And so I've learned What changed my life the most was eliminating hatred from my soul, because I learned that I could take the same action without hatred.
Mm-hmm.
So I could either play the chess game furious, angry, upset, where I could make a mistake, or I could play cool, calm, collected, knowing I have to defeat this person for what they are, because their nature is opposite of mine, and win the game, cool, calm. And I might lose. So I learned to eliminate that hatred from my soul. And that's what I think love thy enemy means. Like, don't hate them. They
And
are what they are.
sometimes to help someone the most, you have to punish them. You have to
Right.
be that enemy
Sure.
to really help them. You slay the demons to help the demons.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, don't let them clip that out of this.
Yeah.
They'll clip it.
Right.
But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I think there are 3 more steps though after giving, because giving correctly and intelligently requires like a greater understanding of things. So I do think that like the contemplative philosophical life is beyond altruism, because I think you need that like generous spirit, magnanimity to be the real philosopher in the first place. Like that's a precondition of philosophy. Just to like at the end of this, like bring back like I better defend philosophy because Lucas kind of attacked it in the beginning. So I'll say like philosophy
Well, I'm
is
not attacking.
higher.
Yeah. I'm not attacking it, of course.
Yeah. And then beyond that is the mystic inspired state, where there's some wisdom that comes to us symbolically, that comes to us like once we've perfected our own faculties as much as possible, the prophetic impulse. You see Socrates like exemplify that in the dialogues very often. Sometimes he's like the perfect dialectician. He's also very often like a generous soul, of course, wanting to help people and give. But yeah, he's also the dialectician. And then like he takes on the role of the prophet very often. And that is a higher state, 6th chakra activity, and then 7th chakra, like release, nirvana, would I think be like the actual last step. But yeah, this was like a really fun conversation. I enjoyed it very much. And yeah, I'd like to talk again. And I think your whole arc of development is fascinating to watch. I think it's, garnered a lot of attention for good reason. And I hope you do come back on X and keep doing, and, do what you're doing now on Rumble, on Telegram, all your platforms. And yeah, I encourage everyone who isn't already subscribed, go check them out. Especially those rants. I mean, it's hard when like you're so passionate to keep things safe for the platforms we use, but yeah, you got to just find that line. And again, props for like pushing the edge, because if no one really exercises their free speech, what is the point? Like you went there. But any final words for the audience?
Yeah, like I said, I like I said off camera to you, I'm not like a really good philosopher as I would think, you are, as someone who's learned and scholarly and read all the books. I'm just like this intuitive philosophical figure, if you will. I'm kind of like the dumb guy, like Lao Tzu. He's like, I'm an ignoramus. I kind of feel like that. That's why the Tao Te Ching really hit me, because to tears, even because it's like so simple. Like we are really, like I used to think so much about everything, and it's driving me crazy. Now I don't think much at all, and I just go with it and learn as I go. And like sitting here listening to you using all these terminal, I don't know what the hell you're saying, but I get it, because I like, what does he mean by that? What's the basics of that? Okay, and not being afraid to say in public, I don't know what that means. Can you explain it? Without the ego, and that's how you learn, right? And this being an interlocutor, not like we're debating, but just interacting with people who have more than you in certain fields improves you. You know what I mean? So I'm always humble. People think I'm this extroverted egomaniac. Actually, quite the opposite. I'm an introverted person. I'm very humble. Now, my rants, you think I'm a maniac. Well, that's kind of true when I'm expressing myself. But what I'm doing is I'm touching the people where they feel it the most. And that's where they're enraged, they're frustrated. And I've had so many people email me the same thing. You expressed exactly the way I feel, not how I think, how I feel. And there's a point where all the intellectualism, which is great and it's understandable, we need to know things, you need to start moving people with emotion. What's emotion? Energy in motion. So I'm at the point where I want to move people. I've learned everything I had to learn about these people that we're fighting. I could read a trillion more books about it, but now it's time to take some action. And what's the action? Getting people to understand, hey, don't be afraid of them. These people rule by consent, right? It's like, remember Satan came to Jesus on the mountain, said, look, just kneel before me. I'll give you everything. And there are people doing that. And these are traitors. And that's why we have these problems, is that there are so-called representatives kneeling to these satanic entities and taking everything, well, at our expense, but also it takes two to tango, right? We're allowing these people to get away with it because we're afraid. We cannot be afraid. So my rants unleash this fury and rage that everyone else is feeling. It's almost like I'm their voice, and they love these things. And yeah, I've gone far and sometimes I pull back, but it's all good. This is like me being a drill instructor. I'm trying to train people not to be scared, because imagine going to boot camp, like, all right, guys, everyone get on the floor now, do some push-ups. No, get on the floor. Let's go. Don't, you got to do it. It's like we're at war. And I'm trying to remind people, imagine Braveheart. All right, you want to be afraid? It wouldn't make sense. You got to pump people up. So it's like Tony Robbins, let's go. Yeah, whoa. It's kind of like this maniac, right? So, but yeah, no, I really appreciate you having me. I'll definitely come back on again. I do want to look into your Christian Platonism. Maybe you can give me some books to recommend just to get the basics of it. Because again, I haven't really dived or even document. You know what I like to do? I like to listen to things in the background. So I'll listen to I'll put on a documentary, just listen to it while I'm doing stuff. So anything you recommend, you can send it to me after the show, because I'm interested in this, because I do think there's something out there. Like the one of the biggest arguments that I think help is the tag argument, right? The transcendental argument for God. And where are these where do they exist? And sometimes I thought it was like a false dichotomy. Like, well, what do you mean? Why must it be God or not God? What if it's something that's not personal that can just maintain those transcendentals, right? What if the universe itself is made of mental energy and they just exist, So there's all these like Jay Dyer and all these other guys. Yeah. So they have good arguments and things like this, but I sometimes feel there's something wrong with that argument. I don't know what it is. And me and Andrew Wilson, we go back and forth on Telegram, well, actually, this and that. No, I always learn from him too. But anyway, the point is, guys, is that, there's always much more to learn and to have humility, right? Don't worry about the ego, feeling like it's stupid, because ultimately we're all stupid. And in fact, I think Socrates said it best. He doesn't know anything, right? And that's why he was the wisest person, because he admitted, like, I don't know much. And you ask any scientist, even those who do quantum physics, they're like, look, the more you know about this, the less you know what the hell's going on. That's the truth, right? There's like an infinite learning curve in a sense. So I really appreciate you having me on. If you guys want to find me, I'm not an X right now. I'm suspended. You can't even follow me there, but you can go to my website, lucasgage.com. You can check out my book there. I have a Telegram. All my links are at bio.site/Lucas Gage. You can follow my Telegram channel, Rumble channel. I do lives where I just talk to the audience. I don't have a show. I just answer questions, anything you want to talk about. People love that, because that's why I chat with everyone. I have a locals community, a few other things, but yeah, that's really much it. Just, always keep an open mind, be willing to talk to people, and just humble yourselves, and be willing to accept things that, might break your heart in some cases. I've had to swallow some truths that really hurt, but, I'm still alive, I'm still going, and I'm willing to keep moving forward. And remember to serve and help each other, because that's what I think we're really here for,
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great words. I'm tempted to just say one last thing because of
Sure, go ahead.
your last point. It's very important. Like, you can't just ascend into intellect and then leave courage alone. Like, you have to go back down. Intellect has to rule your spirit. It has to enable your courage. Courage was thought to be a type of wisdom by Plato and Socrates. Socrates was also like the most courageous warrior in combat. He was, famous for that. He could withstand the elements. Like, if you're just going off into intellect land and you don't bring it back down, and you can't be that warrior that you need to be when the time comes, you're not doing your job. So I think, you're finding that balance very well, and we all appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for listening today, and we'll talk soon.